Okay, so as we get to the last thing here in September, we now have the Road to 7 LB5 Part 1 campaign. This is going to be the Atlantis campaign here. And you guys can see we have banners basically for Super Orion, Odysseus, Achilles, Astraea, Chiron, Chiyome, Hector, and Mandricardo. We have already covered Odysseus, Achilles, and Astraea in this video. Or perhaps even in the prior video or something like that, depending on how these videos get divided up. So we're going to start off with Super Orion and then jump to Chiron, so please don't be upset if that happened. Again, Super Orion is a limited unit. This is a relatively rare banner for him. He's really solid, even still to this day. I don't think anyone would ever say anything negative about Super Orion. I think his only issues really rely on card RNG and being able to sort of facilitate him popping off. If you're using him in a solo environment, that's extremely easy to do, but then the issue becomes his actual survivability, because he actually doesn't have that much in his kit to be able to do so. So at the end of the day, it really just kind of boils down to whether or not you think Super Orion is a unit that you need. There are other units that can do similar things to him, just being a really strong crit-based unit. But I do think Super Orion just has some of the just most raw firepower in the game in that sense. You can see he's got 12k attack. Again, just shy of 14k HP. He's got a triple buster deck, which is definitely something we like to see. He increases his own buster performance for 1 turn by 50%, and will further increase his damage against wild beast or demonic enemies for 1 turn by 50% as well. So a nice power mod there, covering 2 different niches. Because they're in the same effect, and because it says or, it means that it's not an and. So in a sense, you're not getting both of these at the same time. You were just getting up to a maximum of 50%. But I think the issue at play here is rather just more that this is a 1 turn duration. So it is very much that Super Orion becomes a very boom and bust type of servant. You're going to spend a couple turns setting him up to really pop off, and then you're going to pop everything and blow his load. So that just kind of is what that is, but certainly you can manage to sort of card lock him or get him in a solo environment and have it, every single turn at that point. His second skill here is his actual hard survival skill. He gets a guts of 1 time over 3 turns, up to 3000 HP, so it's not the worst. And then increasing his own attack for 3 turns by 20% with a 20 crit star bomb. Again, definitely nice for him to have that star bomb. He gets just some raw firepower there with the attack up and then the hard survivability. And again, his first skill was on a 5-turn cooldown. This one's on a 6-turn. His third one here is also going to be on a 5-turn. So you can see all of his cooldowns relatively low there to kind of help him get back to popping off again. His third skill here will increase his own critical star absorption for 3 turns by 500%. Thankfully, he is an archer, so he has one of the higher star absorptions in the game because of that. And you can see that he will grant himself a buff on attack, where basically for the next 3 attacks, he will increase his own critical damage for 1 turn whenever he uses his buster cards. This is usually what relies on what enables him to get just such insane crit numbers, because again, you can see the crit damage buff here is up to 100%. So really, really, really strong in the fact that this can be a stacked ability, and it's why he can get such crazy numbers. The issue at play here is the limitation of it only being for the first 3 attacks. So there is that. He's only going to have 3 buster cards, but again, maybe you're in a scenario where he's solo and he just has them every single turn. This just means that he's going to hit really hard 1 turn and then very quickly fall off again after that. So keep that in the back of your head, that is going to be kind of just how Super Orion works. He does get independent action EX for some 12% additional crit damage there. Again, he basically has the toxic status, which means he takes even more damage to poison. So usually you don't want to use him against poison related enemies, but again, you can maybe manage to make it work, because NP here has invincibility pierce, a really, really nice effect. It is a support NP. This is also why you usually don't see Super Orion on damage lists, even though he is arguably the highest damage dealing archer. He increases his own attack for 3 turns here. Again, this is the part that's going to scale with his NP level. So you can see it's 30 to 50, just like Castoria, interestingly enough. And then he will grant himself debuff immunity for 3 turns, which, as we talked about the poison situation there before, can't get poisoned if you're immune to it. So definitely a nice thing for him to have. And then he will gain 10 critical stars every turn for 3 turns. I can't stress enough how important this is if you just don't have a lot of stars in the comp, being able to kind of get that regular like sort of influx of stars, because basically due to Super Orion having a triple buster deck and due to it being one hit on those cards, you are not going to generate a lot of stars with Super Orion. So you really need to get that NP in a lot of those situations just to have the consistent inflow. But again, there are other ways you can do it. You can pair them up with a unit like Merlin. You can maybe have a 2030 in the party, or just maybe have a Mystic Code that can provide stars on the turn that you actually need it. Either one of those things are options. And then his overcharge effect will increase his own critical damage for 3 turns by an additional 100%. So again, you look at this in conjunction with that third skill, you can see Super Orion has some insane crit and basically some of the highest modifiers in the game thanks to that. So Super Orion does one thing and he does it incredibly well. He punches you in the face really hard with his buster cards. Is Super Orion good? Still in the current year on JP? Yep. And I'm pretty sure that's why they just don't like giving him a ton of banners. Is he able to solo everything in the game? Nope. That's usually just due to his lack of overall survivability. He is very much a kill or be killed type of unit. You usually get, anywhere from 5 to 10 turns with him to really have him pop off. But beyond that, you're going to have a hard time keeping him alive in a solo environment. But it will depend on what you're facing. Still, you can support him and try to keep him up, but keep in mind, if you're using other units alongside him, that is other units whose cards you may be getting in place of Super Orions, and thus you have to consider the impact that that might have on his ability to actually pop off on the right turn. It might result in you having to hold his skills for the right time, but again, he is a very powerful unit if you manage to use him correctly. Again, skipping Odysseus, Achilles, and Astraea here, jumping straight to Chiron, another, ironically enough, crit-centric unit. You'll see this as we go through the kit, but again, he has 9k attack. This is decent for a 4-star. He's got 12k HP, decent for a 4-star. He's got double quick, double arts deck here. Again, his hit counts are all very solid. He ends up having a self-hard evasion for 1 turn, and then an increase to his defense further for 3 turns. His second skill here increases the party's crit damage for 3 turns by 50%. And this is going to be a big reason why I think a lot of people will use him, is he's pretty decent at taking out an enemy, but also facilitating the party to be able to crit down waves. You can see he also has a star bomb here of 15. It's nothing crazy like the 30 star bombs that we've seen of late, but it is still a strong ability. He will damage himself, but it won't kill him, so there's that. And then his third skill here basically is a targetable tricolor buff of 30% to all 3 card types for 3 turns. This can be very strong in a support capacity. Like I said, you can use him to handle a single enemy wave, and then maybe have him set somebody else up, maybe have the party crit something down, you name it. But in that regard, I don't think Chiron is the most meta. He doesn't have charge or anything like that, but he does hit a lot harder now that he's had his NP interlude. And to show you that, again, you can see he's gotten the upgrade, and it removes one enemy's defense buffs activating before damage. That is already really solid because it means you're not going to stop Chiron from hitting you. It's going to deal damage to them, and then now, thanks to the NP interlude, it's going to deal super effective damage to Earth attribute enemies. Overcharge is sort of that bland old reduce their critical attack chance for 3 turns by 20%, but still don't underestimate this effect. This can be pretty decent at helping keep the party alive at certain points. It just depends on whether or not you're actually in that point to be able to do so. So, again, Chiron, still a pretty decent unit after all these years, but certainly with 90++ content and a more focus on just, insane charge capability, he's definitely fallen off a little bit. Probably not worth a devoted role for, but still an interesting and usable unit at this point. Next up here, we have Chiyome, and Chiyome is the epitome of a unit that's had a really good turnaround story. She is a 4-star single target arts assassin. Again, you can see here, she only has 8.5k attack. That's one of the issues with Chiyome. She's not going to card very hard most of the time. She has double quick, double arts in terms of her deck. Her hit counts are, again, mostly okay here. You've got the arts card and the extra attack are 1 under average, but given the fact that she's got 0.8 in the NP gain department, I think that's well worthy of being the case. Her first skill here has had its upgrade, and it basically ends up adding, in addition to the chance to seal one enemy's NP for 1 turn, a demonic niche of 30% here for 3 turns, and then also the increase to her own damage against enemies with curse status for 3 turns by 20%. I don't really like the fact that it's a 20% power mod, but granted, you can pretty much secure this one all the time, so this is pretty consistent. As again, Chiyome is going to have quite the ability to curse, so just having the ability to have a power mod against it, I think, is just naturally strong. Her second skill here is basically going to increase her own arts performance by up to 30%. It's also going to have a debuff on attack where she will inflict curse, so you're going to want to try to get a lot of use out of this. You're going to want to try to use her cards whenever you have the opportunity, just to be able to curse, just to be able to set up the first skill for being able to deal more damage. The third skill here grants herself evasion for 1 turn and charges her gauge by up to 30%. That's going to make you want to lower that skill, and I don't blame you. But again, definitely nice that she got the charge skill there, and pretty much has been her saving grace at this point throughout all these years. Because for a long time, a lot of our single target assassins did not have charge, so Chiyome having it usually was a leg up for her. Her Noble Phantasm has had its NP interlude, and you can see it deals damage to 1 enemy, seals their skills for 1 turn, so you got to be careful about them hitting you back then after that, and then now inflicts evil curse status for 3 turns that increases the curse damage to them by 200%. So a really strong, capable skill, and this is going to allow her, in combination with that power mod, of just really like it being incentivized to stack curses to get more damage, both from the curse itself and from the power mod that she has. And then to cap it all off, she'll reduce their critical attack chance for 3 turns. So I do find that Chiyome is a lot more usable now than she used to be. Those upgrades really do help her out quite a bit. Definitely give her a shot if you guys haven't in a long time. Is she worth maybe the devoted role? No, it's probably still somewhere in that same realm as like Chiron, where you can manage to use her. But I think for a lot of people, unless you've got a lot of NP levels or you've managed to invest a lot in her, I think you'll notice that she's still kind of hitting a little bit lower than most people would expect. But she is actually pretty good for challenge content because of her whole kit, so I don't think that's the end of the world, and certainly having the 30% charge, nowadays that can set you up to at least kill a single enemy wave should you need to. So Chiyome is still definitely a very serviceable unit. Next up here we have Hector. We haven't managed to cover him, but Hector to me is in a little bit of a weird spot. He's pretty much been completely supplanted at this point by Roma, aka Romulus 3-star. Romulus 3-star has gotten a lot of love over the years, and it's really paid off for him. Hector has simply fallen by the wayside in comparison. But Hector is the epitome of, again, you hear me saying this term a lot, a serviceable unit. So logically, a lot of you guys should have him just due to the fact that he is an FP unit. But again, you can see he's got a 1.08 NP gain rate here. He's got double quick, double buster comparatively with his buster NP. His NP has had its NP interlude. You can see that he ignores defense buffs to all enemies and then basically reduces their defense after the fact. So you can use Hector as sort of a setup man, as a NP in a sequence of NPs to set someone else up. Also because of the way his kit works. His first skill here is his military tactics skill, and it got its upgrade already to increase the party's NP damage for 3 turns by 20%. So really nice for him to be able to pop off a little bit harder, but also to set up somebody else to be able to pop off. He's also going to reduce the party's damage taken for 2 attacks, 3 turns with just a small damage cut there. His second skill here will be a chance to reduce one enemy's NP gauge for 1 turn and a chance to stun them for 1 turn. This skill needs an upgrade, and it needs to basically be his form of vampirism, where it actually provides him charge. The drain chance also needs to go to 100%. This is sad and pathetic because it can still fail, and there's nothing worse than lowering a skill and finding out it can still fail. So again, at the end of the day, I think this is really where Hector is lacking at this point. You have a unit like Romulus that already has Imperial Privilege, already has charge, and just hits like a ton of bricks, has good survivability. So I think giving Hector something a little bit more other than just party buffer would be decent for him. So converting this into like a 30% charge skill, I think would really help turn things around. Again, he does have the stun chance for 1 turn as well here, but it is what it is. His third skill here is just your standard disengage. It's going to cleanse his own debuffs and recover his HP, so just solid skill altogether. Again, you can see his kit is not bad. He doesn't really have that hard survival. That is going to be his issue. But for just taking out a wave and buffing someone else, he's always going to have that usefulness. And that's where, again, he is the epitome of serviceable. Last on this banner, we have Mandricardo. Mandricardo is your best friend. Mandricardo is a single target arts writer. He's definitely improved some, but I think he still is somewhat clunky to use. He's actually a very popular character, just due to people really liking the way that his character was kind of written. Again, he's got double quick, double arts deck here, which I think is good for him. He really wants that NP gain when possible. And you can see his first skill here increases his own defense for 3 turns and the party's attack for 3 turns by 30% and 20% respectively. The second skill here did get its upgrade. This used to be the skill where he just again would very quickly sacrifice himself. You can see he can only use it when he's at 50% HP or less. There's no good way to get him at less than 50% HP other than like chin gonging him, so it usually resulted in him trying to like taunt and get hit in order to gain the potential capability here. But this does mean that if you can get him into a sacrificial mode, that you're going to allow him to pop off, hit hard, and then die, kind of rotating the party and bringing someone else in. That's always been the usefulness of Mandricardo. I wish they would make that a little bit easier to do a la Arash, but sadly to this point in time they have not. Again, you can see it's going to increase his own attack for 1 attack for 1 turn, so basically the next attack that he does by 50%. It's also going to increase his critical damage for 1 attack 1 turn by 100%, so if that attack is a crit, it will crit very hard. And then basically gives him a debuff on attack for the duration of the turn that allows him to remove defensive buffs from one enemy whenever he attacks. And then he has a 500% chance to sacrifice himself when attacking for 1 turn, which is treated as a buff. So in other words, you can't get rid of it. This got upgraded to basically increase his own attack for 1 turn and increase his own crit damage for 1 turn. So that's the entire duration of the turn. And basically has a 500% chance to inflict a delayed debuff 1 time for 1 turn to oneself, treated as a buff, which is basically that he will now sacrifice himself at the end of the turn rather than immediately upon the attack. So, and a quality of life upgrade for him. It just means that he kind of has this glass cannon, last ditch, sort of last stand type skill where he's just going to go in there. He's going to hit really hard and go out in a blaze of glory. But instead of it happening the second he does the hit, it will now happen at the end of his turn after he's done all of his hits. I think that's a lot better for him, and I do think that helps out, especially with sort of doing an NP and then following it up with damage after the fact. His third skill here increases his own quick and arts performance for 3 turns by only 20%. And then again, right here, as I mentioned before, he has a taunt for 1 turn. So this is usually how people will try to get Mandricardo to be a little bit lower in the health department. You can see his Noble Phantasm hasn't had its upgrade. It's a single hit 4 hit single target arts NP. It's going to deal damage to 1 enemy and then have a 500% chance to reduce his own attack for 10% for 1 turn. I think for a lot of people are going to try to use this with his brink shot capability, so the demerit's not that big of a deal, but certainly if he's going to stay alive for you, then yes, having some way of getting rid of a 10% attack down would be nice. His overcharge effect will increase his own quick arts and bust performance for 1 turn by 20%, so again, additional carding after the NP, definitely a nice thing to have. I do think Mandricardo is a really interesting unit. I think he does have some niche challenge applications. I would like to see him be a little bit more use on demand type unit, with his death proc being able to be triggered as we desire. But other than that, I think he's, at least improved, and I think he's still a somewhat nichely useful unit. Again, you guys can see the banner pacing here. You've got 3 days of Super Orion, 3 days of Odysseus, and then 4 days, ironically enough, of Achilles. You can see that Hector and Mandricardo are on right up all banners, but that otherwise the 4 stars get paired up alongside. And then last thing to consider for the Road to 7 campaign here is the fact that you can get the Argonaut CE on rate up. This CE is a story locked CE. You only get given a single copy of it after you finish the actual the actual Lost Belt there. So everybody should have one copy, but if you're trying to be a completionist and you want to MLB it, this would be probably the best time to roll in order to get that, because otherwise you're going to have to go fishing in the story banner in order to see if you can kind of get one out of it. So that is going to be September in a nutshell. And then now we get to move on into October. You can see right here, we are now in the 10th month, and here is the 9th advanced quest. So really keeping pace there. And now we get to go into basically part 2, where the devs really said, hey, you know what? We absolutely do need to catch back up here. We really need to make sure that we are getting this done before LB7 actually comes out. So this is going to be your part 2 of Road to 7. This is going to be the Olympus variant of LB5's Road to 7 campaign. Again, you can see going to be some nice units here. Basically, this is going to be the return of Romulus, Dioscuri, Europa, and Caenis. Definitely got some interesting things to say about these units, so let's go ahead and dive right in. I think Romulus is a very, very solid unit. I think he would actually probably be one of the more hyped Lancers if Melisande didn't exist right now. That is to say, if you didn't have the craziness of Melisande combined with Black Grail and Oberon, that you would actually see Romulus 5-star version here being hyped to all hell and back, and that a lot of people would have a lot more favorable opinion of him. I don't think people have, in general, a bad opinion of Romulus. If they do, they're probably missing the mark, because, again, he is a really good one. Just that he's not super hyped anymore, and you don't really hear too many people talk about him. Again, I think with Romulus, he just has a kit that is designed to be strong in both challenge and farm content, and you will see that as we go through. Got 12k attack, only 13k HP, a 0.59 NP gain rate. Again, you can see he's got Quicken Arts up of basically only 3 of his cards, and that's because he is a Buster unit, so you're going to want that double Buster in order to form a triple Buster Brave Chain with his MP. His hit counts, though, are all average or better. His first skill here increases the party's attack for 3 turns by 20%, party critical damage for 3 turns by 20%, and then the critical damage of Roman allies by 30%. He also has a 500% chance to inflict the Roman trait debuff for 5 turns to all enemies. Definitely an interesting thing that you want to pay attention to. But again, he himself is Roman, so he's going to gain the benefit of basically all the buffs here. And then you can see his second skill is going to grant himself invincibility for 2 attacks over 3 turns. It's also going to charge his NP gauge by 30% and gain him 10 crit stars. Definitely nice. Hard survival right there, and charge, exactly what I like to see. His third skill here increases his own Bush performance for 3 turns by 30%, and his star absorption for 1 turn by 500. I would probably prefer the star absorption to be higher because he is only a Lancer, and as far as Lancers go, he's not got the most robust star absorption. So to me, this could actually end up being improved, but it is what it is. He will grant himself a debuff on attack, though, for 3 turns that will inflict the Roman trait debuff for 5 turns to an enemy when critical attacking. So if you can manage to land crits, that's more stacks of his Roman debuff. Thing to keep in mind here is if you look at the first skill, he does have it on a 5-turn cooldown. This means you can get back to this skill on turns 1 and 2 in a double Koyanskya setup. His second skill here is his NP charge skill. This means you're going to pop it on turns 1 and 3, which is ideal for a double Koyanskya Oberon setup, as he will kind of function best in. And then his third skill here is Buster Up for 3 turns, basically, and then the Roman trait whenever he crits. Essentially, all on a 5-turn cooldown, allowing him to pop this as well on turns 1 and 2. So he gets a lot of really quick ramp ability in his kit. It means you're going to be able to double up on these skills, get a lot of steroids at play. That's what's going to make Roma hit hard for you, regardless of what it is that you're facing. And certainly, most of the things that you will face will be Roman, because he will make it so. So again, as you can see here, his Noble Phantasm is a 5-hit AoE. It deals damage to all enemies and then deals extra damage per stack of the Roman trait debuff on them to them. So again, he's going to have scaling damage based off the number of stacks. This is why I say he's great in a farm or a challenge scenario. He can already hit hard in a farm. You can make him 3-turn with a double Koyanskya Oberon setup. But then if you put him in a challenge environment, he's going to have the capability of getting even more Roman stacks with all the carding he'll be doing. So definitely an interesting thing. Keep in mind, too, you can pre-card an NP to try and get stacks to try and increase damage. Obviously, no one wants to have to card at all if they don't have to, but at the same time, it just may be necessary, especially at lower NP levels, especially at different times, for him to try and use that strategy. So I highly implore you to keep an eye out for it. This will inflict the Roman trait debuff for 5 turns to them and grant the party the Roman trait buff for 5 turns, meaning that, yet again, his first skill and the fact that it increases the critical damage of all allies will basically apply to everybody, not just the Roman ones, as everybody will be Roman after he uses his MP the first time. His overcharge effect is a very interesting one as well, as it increases the party's attack for 3 turns by 10%. This is stackable. This does mean in a loop, he's going to get stronger and stronger. So again, highly recommend Romulus if you have no other good options for AoE Lancer and you just maybe aren't keen on Melisande for whatever reason. He is still one of the hardest hitting AoE Lancers in the game and really got a solid kit no matter how you look at it. We have already talked about Dioscuri. We have already talked about Europa. I believe we have already talked about Caenis. No, actually, I don't think we did, because I don't think Caenis was in the Valentine's Day review for that. Or if she was, I didn't end up touching her. So, Caenis is a 4-star story locked unit. That's going to be your big consideration with her. You're definitely going to want to make sure that you actually, try to get her if you want her. Otherwise, you're not going to have good opportunities necessarily, because rolling the story banner is something that no one wants to have to do. So, at the end of the day, I recommend trying to get Caenis if you want her here, potentially, because this is a good opportunity given who she manages to be on rate up alongside, be it Romulus there. Still, that being said, they are both AoE Lancers, and one could preclude the other in that sense, so there is that to consider. But this is sort of our issue at this point. Our AoE Lancers don't have a whole lot to stand out against each other in the face of their kits. And I think that's something that really desperately needs to get addressed by the devs, because again, having a reason to use Caenis over other Lancers is going to be somewhat difficult. That being said, Caenis does have good solid attack power. She suffers in the HP department in order to sort of deal with that. But again, she definitely has some very nice art and a pretty good NP gain rate. But she's going to need that good NP gain rate since she has a double buster, double quick deck. Again, the hit counts here are all average, so nothing too bad there. Her first skill is a monstrous attack buff for 2 turns of 40%. I wish this were a 3-turn duration, but probably the devs would find that to be a little bit too strong. Her second skill here has had its upgrade, and thank God it has, because basically it granted her 20% charge. She basically already has a grant buff on attack buff that will increase her normal attack for 1 turn when she attacks. So pre-carding her NP is always the better solution for her in terms of damage. And then it will also inflict attack down by 10% for every turn to any enemy when normal attacking. So she is wildly swinging the damage in your favor. That is to say, you deal more damage, the enemy deals less damage. And that is absolutely great for sort of winning a fight over time. She will gain critical stars every single turn for 3 turns, up to 15. This is a nice addition. It really helps her out, but admittedly, Buster usually doesn't need that many stars, so it is what it is. But again, the flat 20% charge here does mean that with a double Oberon setup, you can 3-turn with Caenis. Obviously, it'd be more ideal if this were a 30% buff, but I think they just looked at Lotto and what they gave her, and they tried to achieve somewhat parity there. Her third skill here ends up being the ability to reduce her own damage taken for 3 attacks, 3 turns, up to 3,000. Definitely a stronger damage cut, but it's also paired with her self guts of 1 time for 3 turns by 3000%. So you got a little bit of an issue there where you may end up, absorbing so much that you actually manage to outlive the Guts' duration. Then it falls off, and then you die on the next turn due to the hits. So definitely not the best of situations there, but it is what it is, and that can't be helped at this point unless the devs choose to buff it. Her NP basically has not had its interlude. That's maybe one of the good things that she has going for her in the long term. It's a 3-hit AoE NP. It increases her own critical damage by 50% for 3 turns, activating first, kind of even further pushing you down that crit and carding path with her. She'll deal damage to all enemies, and then her overcharge effect is that she increases her own NP damage for 3 turns, activating first by 10%. Does mean that this is stackable, and again, with Oberon and his 3rd skill, it means that you're going to get a lot of amplified power out of this. But remember, you're going to be having to use a double Oberon setup, so probably using a better CE is pretty much out of the question. You'll be looking at utilizing K-Scope on Caenis because of this. Though certainly that's only if you want to 3-turn with her. If you try to use her in some sort of mixed setup, you could probably get a little bit further in that regard. But still, I do find Caenis to be a rather interesting and somewhat rare unit, so again, up to you to determine if you want to roll there. You can see for banner purposes, you've got 4-day banners basically with Europa and Caenis, and then Romulus and Caenis. So again, you can kind of mix and match there if you so choose, or perhaps even Dioscuri with Caenis, just depending on what you're after. Definitely a better situation for her, as one of the things that we have criticized the pity system for before as we move forward into JP's times is that it is somewhat difficult to get your 4 stars, especially when they don't get solo rate ups. So the fact that Caenis is a somewhat rare unit, getting a solo rate up here, definitely good for people that want more copies of her. And you have 3 choices by which to pair with her. The rate up CE, however, for this is going to end up being the same version as we talked about for Atlantis. This is going to be the CE that you get upon completion of Olympus. You get 1 copy. If you like to be a completionist person, you can roll for more here while it's on rate up to try and get MLB. Otherwise, you're going to go fishing in the story banner, and no one wants to have to do that. So next up, we have the Eliza event. This is a very, very interesting event in that regard. Again, I'm not going to spend too long talking about the welfares, as I'll probably end up covering them in a different video. But essentially, Eliza is a pretty decent option for you guys. You can see that she is an AoE Buster Pretender. A lot of you guys will already have Oberon, and you'll think that as a result that you don't need anyone else, but Eliza in certain circumstances can outdamage him, and it just gives you a non-supporty unit in order to use. So having her for free, definitely a nice thing, though admittedly she could be stronger in some ways. Talking about the actual updates here, you guys can see this is where Qin Liang Yu and basically Mr. Fister, aka Yan King, get his upgrade. So again, interesting to say the least, but this is going to end up being sort of the banner for Huyan Zhou. So Huyan Zhou is going to be a particularly interesting one in my opinion, because she's going to be coming out at this point basically prior to Ilia Fest. It's going to be the start of 2 AoE SSR assassins at a point at which prior to this, we actually had no quick AoE SSR assassins. And I always found that really weird, that the class that is known for its card type out of any of them has long been quick with assassin. Yes, over the years, we've definitely gotten other non-quick assassins, but it's kind of wild to me that assassin was known for that card type, and yet you didn't have an SSR AoE of that card type prior to this point. So it is what it is, but again, I do think Huyan Zhou can be a pretty interesting unit in that regard. She was somewhat criticized when she came out, as people were pointing out that she was stale, that she was boring, that she just had a very simple sort of mass-produced kit. I don't think that's true. I think that that's usually people just kind of letting their bias show through and hating on quick because they don't want to have to roll the units for it. But at the end of the day, it is what it is. And I'm going to say that her performance is still pretty good. So as you can see, she's only got a 0.53 NP gain rate. She's only got 11k attack, but still nothing too bad there. She's got double quick, double buster, again, lending us in that Summer Scotty sort of setup here. And the hit counts are all actually really good here, especially on the quick and arts cards there at 4 each. Her first skill here is a quick and buster up of 3 turns, basically of 30% each there. And then essentially she will increase her own critical star gen rate whenever she attacks with a quick card, and she will increase her own critical damage rate whenever she attacks with a buster card, incentivizing you to use both. I'm not the biggest fan of these types of skills, mostly because it uses a lot of the itemization on it, but at the end of the day, I'm okay with this. I don't think it's a bad effect in the slightest, just that it feels to me that they've kind of done this trope now a couple of times. And I do think that's where some of those criticisms come from. Her second skill here is Ignore Invincibility for 3 turns. That's definitely nice. We don't have a whole ton of AoE assassins doing that sort of thing. She's also going to increase her own attack for 3 turns by 30% and increase her own critical star absorption by 500%. Again, with that in mind, you guys can see she is only an assassin, so at 98 there, I do think, again, this could be a better percentile, but it's not the end of the world by any means. Her third skill here is her hard survival skill. She gets 2 attacks, 3 turns, an increase to her own buff removal resistance by 100% potentially, and then a increase to her own NP gauge of 30% there. So the 30% charge is really nice. I've talked to you guys about buff removal resistance before. It's a really nice thing to have, but I'm not wild about a unit that only buffs themselves with it, because it usually just means that that unit doesn't get stripped, everyone else does, and then everyone else around dies. So at the end of the day, it's nice that she has it, but I certainly prefer a unit to have AoE buff removal resistance rather than just on themselves. Beyond this, you can see she has an 8-hit AoE NP. That's certainly going to help out with the NP gain here. It's going to deal damage to all enemies, then deal super effective damage to enemies with an evil alignment. And kind of similar to Bradamante, she's going to have a 40% chance to stun all of those enemies. So certainly pretty nice here. I do think alignments are a little less useful compared to traits, but at the end of the day, it's definitely a pretty wide open a pretty wide open alignment there with evil. So I think it's still a good niche for her to have. She's going to increase her own quick performance for 1 turn, activating first by 20%. Unfortunately, it's not 3 turns, so you don't get that stacking buff. I think that would have actually been really nice for her, but still, at the end of the day, I think a lot of people are probably just either going to roll because they like the design of the unit. They basically end up liking, how she looks, and maybe they just need a powerful AoE assassin. Really, that's going to be the determining factor. She is a quick loopable option. So at the end of the day, I like Huyan Zhou. She's not going to be the best unit ever in the game, but I don't think she's a bad unit, and I don't think she deserved the rap that she got when she first came out. Huang Feihu is the next one up here. He is a permanent unit. He is single target Buster Rider. Again, his attack stat is actually quite low considering, so I'm not, I'm going to say this. It's not a bad attack stat, but it's not in that 9k range that we like to see our 4 stars in to consider them to be high. He's got 12k HP though to somewhat offset that, and he's got double arts, double buster deck here, which again, as you can see as you scroll down, that is basically his first skill here. So he increases the party's arts and buster performance for 3 turns by 20% each, and then he will grant himself the Prince Wu Chang who guards the kingdom status for 3 turns, which basically just means that it will change his own chaotic alignment to lawful alignment. So hilariously enough, this is the erasure of his chaotic and changing it to lawful, rather than just adding a lawful alignment that wasn't already there. Just keep that in the back of your head as to how this is going to work for this unit. His second skill here increases his own NP gauge for 3 turns by 20%, self-gut status of 1 time for 3 turns by 3,000, and if he himself is lawful because he has used his first skill here, this will then increase his own critical damage by 50%. If he is chaotic alignment because he hasn't used his first skill, then that's going to increase his NP gen rate for 3 turns by 50%. I'm going to flat out tell you that you probably will prefer the crit damage, but if you take him into a carding scenario, who knows, you may want that NP gain to get back to another NP. So I'm going to tell you you're probably safer to go ahead and use this first skill rather than not, but it may depend on the circumstances. His third skill here increases his own attack for 3 turns by 30%, increases his own crit damage by 30% for 3 turns, and then just gives him stars every single turn up to 10. Thankfully, he is a writer, so his star absorption is extremely high. Definitely good for him in that regard, as it'll make it easy for him to soak those stars back to himself. From here, you can see he does have, again, a 5-hit single target NP that deals damage to one enemy, and then an overcharge effect that is a tricolor buff for 3 turns of 10%. So he will keep stacking this the more you can get him to NP, but the big thing you guys got to pay attention to is the fact that he basically only has charge per turn rather than charge on command. This does allow him to be able to 3-turn, but it's going to be a 3-turn with a double Oberon type of setup, and that's assuming you need to 3-turn with a single target rider. So it just ends up being what it is. I don't think he's a bad unit, but due to the fact that he's permanent, I think a lot of people probably aren't going to try too hard, and the real breadwinner here is going to be Huyan Zhou. The second campaign here is going to end up being Jack de Molay and basically the return of Tai Gong Wang yet again. You can see he's already had a ton of banners. In fact, while everybody was harping on how many banners that Morgan Le Fay had, Tai Gong Wang actually had more banners faster than she did. This is definitely an interesting thing to point out at this point. I believe we have already covered Jack de Molay. So, in fact, after consulting with chat here, we have already covered all of these units before, except for one. And that one unit is Mr. Yagyu, aka Sitting EX, as we like to call him. Munenori is a pretty strong unit. I think when he first came out, he kind of burst onto the scene as just this almost like better, more survivable, more challenge-oriented version of Lancelot. But I think over time that has kind of shifted back in Lancelot's favor. One, due to the fact that Lancelot has had a nice upgrade, and two, due to the fact that I think Munenori's biggest issue is his 1-turn durations on skills. We're kind of beginning to see as that's really holding units back in an era where like everything nowadays seems to have 3-turn effects. It doesn't mean he's a bad unit. It just means he's very boom and bust, very much a use it and then lose it until you get it back type of unit, rather than having multiple turn durations to kind of work things out. So you can see here he's got 9999999. In fact, I think if you were to just maybe cover up the 1 right here, you could in fact say that this is a very nice sequence of numbers. But again, definitely a strong attack stat for him there, and you can see that he manages to have slightly anemic HP because of it. It's not too bad for a 4-star, but it's not too good either. He's got man attribute here and 0.8 NP charge attack. He is a single target arts saber, and as a result, he gets the 2 arts cards. I certainly wish he had 3 instead, but that'd probably be too much since he's got the 0.8 one, and that is why he's only got 2-hit arts there. He does get a 4-hit quick, but otherwise his 2 buster cards there are only 1 hit. So his first skill here increases his arts up by 50% for 1 turn. So again, the single turn duration there coming there to bite him. He gets critical star absorption of his arts cards for that turn by 500. Again, Saber's not the worst, but it's also not the best. So sitting here at 100, this could certainly stand to be a little bit higher. But at the end of the day, I think it's still going to be more about actually getting the stars onto the arts cards that are going to be the issue. He increases his own debuff resistance by 100% for that duration of that turn, so that at least helps him out in a challenge environment. It's going to make it so that things can't basically debuff him and debilitate him as much. But due to the 1-turn duration, odds are you're going to end up utilizing this for the steroid when you need it, rather than trying to prevent debuff. So it'll just have to be a sort of, hey, we also managed to prevent a debuff in the process type of use. The second skill here is the one that's had its upgrade. Basically, it started out as an evasion for 1 turn and increasing his own attack for 1 turn by 20%. And then it gets upgraded to basically increasing his own crit damage for 1 turn by 100%. Definitely pushed him more in the crit department. Lancelot's someone that to me can manufacture the crits a lot easier and kind of keep going with it. So I still to this day, while this is a very strong buff for him, I think this is still a weird buff for him. I would have actually liked instead if they came back around and said the attack up was 3 turns and maybe 30%. I think that alone would have just really helped out his usability. But again, can't really argue with 100% crit damage, so it is what it is. Third skill here reduces one enemy's attack for 1 turn by 50% and increases his own NP gen rate by 50%. So definitely a nice effect there. You're really going to want to make sure that you're popping this in the same turn as the art's up, trying to maybe loop, maybe crit, get back to another NP, because that's really all Munenori is going to have. Yagyu basically does not have a charge skill, and so getting to the NP is going to be highly card dependent. He's got a 4-hit single target NP that deals damage to one enemy and reduces their attack for 3 turns. I could see Yagyu into the future getting an NP interlude. At this point, I think it's okay if he does, but there are certainly certain units out there that probably need an upgrade if he does as well, given the upward pressure that he would manage to end up putting on some of the 5 stars. So at the end of the day, I do think Yagyu's still somewhat serviceable, but I do think he's beginning to fall behind the times. Probably to me, not really worth going after unless you just really want that collection copy, or that, again, just the fact that he's not going to get a lot of easy banners there. But at the end of the day, you can see the way this banner is scheduled. He is going to basically be paired with, say, Shonagon, so maybe that might be another mitigating factor for you. If you like, say, trying to get him there and getting coins for him as well, not too bad. But otherwise, that may also be another reason not to roll, just depending on how you feel about Say. So again, definitely an interesting banner for him there. You can see the actual way they handled the rate ups here, and these craft essences here are the same as the craft essences from the first banner. Honestly, the NP gen, NP damage, and crit damage here would not be a bad CE if this one was all attack, but sadly it's not, so really nothing too much to talk about for the actual Halloween event. And that's going to cover that one. We had the 2 million followers commemoration. Nothing really going on here other than more courts, which is always nice. And then we go into the main interlude for Imaginary Scramble. I'm really happy to see this one finally get a main interlude, and you know, I'm sure a lot of people are going to groan because you're going to remember the depth charges and kind of how long it took you to clear it. Good news for the main interlude for this. They actually made it a lot faster. You can skip the animations for some of that, and there's basically no sort of actual currency that you have to expend. So it's more just a button press simulator of just going in there and getting like the weird sort of like ADHD appeasal of being able to like tick off all of the boxes there. So definitely interesting in that regard. Again, you can see it's just going to be the return of this. If you've already managed to pay for it at some point, it wouldn't cost you. So again, now it's free here, and basically as long as you've cleared Yuga Kestra, which is LB4. If you haven't, then it'll probably cost you, but once you do clear it, it won't cost you. And you can see this is going to unlock interludes as well for Van Gogh. This is going to be a thing. I haven't really talked about it too much this year, but essentially you'll start to see as interludes or units become available, even if you don't own the unit. That's going to be actually really nice. You're going to want to make sure you do all of them when you get the opportunity, because that will enable you to complete more milestones. And should you ever eventually acquire the unit, it will already be done for you, meaning you'll have already done their story. You will have already potentially upgraded them if it is an upgrade. So definitely a nice thing to do, as you're just going to get easy rewards and easy milestone progress. Again, there's going to be some quests for that. I'm not going to go too deep into it, but you can see this will be the return of the Nemo banner. Unfortunately for Nemo, we have already covered him back in the Chaldea Boys banner, so we're not too concerned about him, but everybody else here is fair game, so we get to talk about Van Gogh now. Van Gogh's a really interesting unit. I think certainly some people undervalue Van Gogh, and I'm also going to say that I think some people, in a weird way at this point, overvalue Van Gogh. I've kind of seen her run the gambit in terms of opinions, where she's just a very interesting unit and people are very opinionated on her. That being said, let's go through her kit right now real quick. So again, she's got 11k attack, but a whopping 15k HP for being very thick there. 0.76 NP gain rate and a triple quick setup here in terms of her cards. The hit counts are all average or above in the case of the Buster and Quick cards, so definitely nice. And you can see her first skill here grants herself gut status for 1 time over 5 turns. And then 3 stacks of curse to herself for 10 turns. However, the good news is it will charge her own NP gauge per curse stack. This is actually really nice. If you manage to have more than the 3 curse stacks on her, you could potentially get even more charge. So it is 10% per stack, but there is some interesting stuff you can do with that. And then basically, if I didn't already denote it, 3000 HP on the guts, not bad either. Her second skill here has a 150% chance to reduce one enemy's defense for 3 turns. Sorry, reduce all enemies' defense for 3 turns by 20%. Thing to keep in mind with 150% is that it is not 500%. This means it does have a chance of being resisted. It does have a chance of failure as a result. Though at 150%, it is highly unlikely that it will, as most units will not have enough resistance to really counteract that. She will reduce their quick resistance by 20% for 3 turns, which is really nice given her quick deck. Grants the party evasion for 1 attack over 3 turns, kind of like, again, that Harp of Healing type skill. Recover the party's HP by 300 every turn for 5 turns, which, if you will remember, the curse that she deals to herself every single turn is basically 300. So healing the party by 300 every turn for 5 turns means you're at least offsetting that somewhat. And then has a 500% chance to inflict curse for 100 damage for 10 turns to the party. So remember what I said about offsetting it? Yeah, it's only partially. It's not completely now. And that's kind of the issue that you run into. Also, the fact that she did debuff the entire party right there is something you've got to consider. But it's not as it seems at this point. The third skill here will increase one ally's attack for 3 turns, increase their critical star absorption for 3 turns, so again 30 and 100% there, and then grants herself a buff on attack activate buff for 3 turns that removes her own latest curse debuff when attacking with quick cards. So she can at least cleanse her own curse stacks. The issue at play with this is that you probably want the curse stacks for charge, but certainly in a knockdown, drag out environment in the middle of a challenge quest, you do need to be at least concerned with her ability to keep going. So that may be, better than getting the charge. In other words, not dying is going to be better than getting charged, quickly or temporarily, but it just may, depend on whether or not that charge gets you to an NP or something like that. If it is successfully removed, the debuff will increase her own attack by 10% for 3 turns, so there is an upside to removing the curses. Also, she will absorb all enemies' curses, so any cursing that she's done to them, as well as the entire party's curses to herself. So she soaks everyone, the party and the enemies, all their curses to herself. So even though she cursed the party with the second skill, with the third skill she has the ability to soak it, and then with the first skill here you have the ability to charge based off of it. So you do have that capability to kind of handle that and basically be able to convert it. So definitely an interesting thing, and then maybe cleanse it after the fact if you're worried about having too much. You can see she also has a unique passive that her HP will never fall below 1 whenever she takes curse damage, meaning she cannot die from just the curse damage, but she can die from every other source. So definitely an interesting thing there. She has a support-based NP that has a chance to inflict terror status for 1 time over 3 turns, with a 60% chance to activate, which is not bad. Basically, it has a 500% chance to stun whenever it does activate, so there's no guarantee which turn it happens on. She will also increase the party's critical damage for 3 turns, which is what scales up with her NP levels here. So there is at least some incentive to get more copies of Van Gogh, but I'm going to say the majority of that is going to just be in actually getting the singular copy of her, the very first copy, getting her kit online and being able to use her. That's going to matter more than getting additional copies by far. So I don't think there's really that big of a need to actually roll for more unless you just really like using Van Gogh. She will further increase the critical damage of basically any foreigner allies or anyone else that has the existence outside the domain passive, because there are a few non-foreigners that do, by 100% for 3 turns, which does allow for some interesting synergy depending on who her party members are. She can gain 10 critical stars every single turn for 3 turns. So again, adding a nice little engine in there. And then her overcharge effect will increase the party's attack by 30% for 3 turns, meaning that you're going to kind of want to keep sitting there, popping all of her skills, getting to her NP, keeping that enemy debilitated, and repeatedly just sitting there quick carding against them over and over and over and over and over again. Getting them crits, doing it over and over and over again. Really, really nice to use Van Gogh in certain circumstances, and she's actually very strong in a challenge environment. It doesn't seem like she has a whole lot of survivability, and she doesn't really, but she does have some, and the ability to keep debilitating and potentially even stunning can work to her favor. So I do really like Van Gogh, and she is still a solid unit to this day in JP. Next up, we have Fran Saber, a single target quick saber. She's a limited unit all the way back from Summer 2. You will denote here that she has 70% NP charge here, and that's going to be an important point. She's got the 2 quick cards at 3 hits and a singular arts card at 4 hits. And just to denote here, she has basically a summer variant of Galvanism. So she can only use this when her NP gauge is at 10% or higher, but it's going to increase her own NP generation rate for 3 turns. By how much? By potentially 80%. So even though she is a quick unit, she does not have bad NP gen. She can do some crazy stuff with her NP and with her cards. She will reduce her own gauge by 10%. That is the demerit there. So you got to have the 10%. She will drain it then, but you get 80% NP gain, which should help more than make up for that. Just make sure you pair this on a turn where she actually has her good NP gain cards there. Her second skill here can only be used when her own HP has more than 500, and then will reduce one enemy's attack for 3 turns by 20%, but also buff strip them. So that at least has some nice applications in being able to stop things like dodge or invuln or heck, even guts. They're really, really good there, assuming it's not one of those, unique challenge variants that has the white border around them, which means they can't be removed. But it is what it is. As long as you can remove it, this is definitely a strong skill. However, it will deal 500 damage to herself without killing, but since it can only be used when the HP is more than 500, you wouldn't really have any capability to test. So it's kind of funny that they have that limitation in there. Her third skill here increases her own attack for 3 turns by up to 20%, increases her own NP damage for 3 turns by 20%, and then has a 500% chance to inflict burn, which is unstackable on herself for 5 turns. Again, I think you can see this is another one of those units where I actually do really like Fran, but devs, what the hell are you doing with all of these demerits? Even if she didn't have all these demerits, it would not be the end of the world. She would not be the most broken unit. So again, I think it's high time they kind of revisit some of this, and even if they do nothing else, at least get rid of the demerits. Her Noble Phantasm is a 5-hit single target quick NP. It deals damage to one enemy and then has a 500% chance to inflict the charging status for 1 turn to them, which has a 20% chance to activate the debuff below. When activated, it will stun all enemies except the enemy with this debuff for 1 turn after 1 turn. I don't really like this. This to me is a really shitty low chance. I think this absolutely could use an NP interlude and be strengthened. You could activate this all the way up to like 60% and it still wouldn't be broken. It would still have significant chance of failure and just be what it is. So I don't think this is a good spot for this amount to be at, but it is, again, what it is. The overcharge effect here, though, at least is the saving grace, as it has a chance to stun them at 60%. Again, this is going to stun the particular enemy, whereas this one ends up stunning the side enemies. still not that strong, but I do think there's some interesting potential applications for being able to loop Fran Saber over and over and over again and keep locking a singular enemy down if she gets lucky with the stuns. And I have seen her be very strong in that capacity, but it is going to be RNG based. You may fail, you may not have them completely locked down, so just be careful using it. But it is a pretty hilarious thing to see when it actually does work out. So again, Fran Saber, even though she's a year 2 unit, I think she holds up pretty well, especially for a quick unit. But yeah, I'd like to see those debuffs get worked on. Now, those of you guys in the middle of the Barbados raid right now, you'll know that raids sometimes get annoying and have just, stupid debuff effects that apply right at the beginning of the run. Not unique to raids either. You see this in challenge quests sometimes, and that is one of the big reasons to have a Mama Raiko Lancer. There's several other big reasons that you may want to roll for her, and that's perfectly fine, but at the end of the day, she's just a single target limited summer buster Lancer that has good attack. She does have 12k HP, which is nice. Unfortunately, that is her weakness, is Mama Raiko got no survivability in her kit. She's got two quick cards here and 2 buster cards here, but a 4-hit arts card to really help that out with a 0.75 NP gain rate. Her first skill here increases her own critical star absorption and critical damage for 1 turn by 1,000 on the absorption and 50 on the damage. Very similar to her Berserker's skill, all on a 5-turn cooldown. Second skill here increases one ally's buster performance for 3 turns by 40%. So it is a 3-turn, 40% targetable buff with Buster that also cleanses them. That is really good. Just be careful about buff block, because the sequence of events here is that it applies the Buster buff, then the cleanse. So you would still get the Buster buff blocked if you did it in that order, but it is what it is. You just may have to deal with it, and it may be the only way to get around it. Still, this is a really useful sort of utility skill, as it is just a powerful steroid with a cleanse in tow, and I think that has just got its niche uses, and it always has and always will. Her third skill here increases the party's attack by 20% for 3 turns. So again, even more party help there, and increases the party's critical star generation rate for 3 turns by 30%. So Mama Raiko, great at taking out a single enemy and then giving the love to someone else, or great at just setting someone else up, or great at just being the devoted damage dealer herself. The issue is just her survivability. That's the only thing she doesn't have. There's an NP that deals defense ignoring damage and then gains critical stars of up to 20. So got that nice crit star bomb, kind of in the same way that Mama Raiko Berserker does, though hers is star generation. This one is just a flat star bomb, so really, really nice in that regard. And again, she has all the capability to soak that right back to herself and be able to crit hard with it. So yeah, I think Mama Raiko, still to this day, a very powerful offensive unit if used correctly. And that is going to be that for that banner. You guys can see here as you end up having the scheduling. Basically, you've got Fran Saber paired with Nemo, and then Mama Raiko Lancer paired with Van Gogh. Feel sorry for Fran Saber in that regard, because I think Mama Raiko ended up with the better pairing there, but it is what it is. You can see here, you will also get the return of the craft essences from the Imaginary Scramble event. Obviously, Mystery Treasure here has got some just fantastic artwork here. I wish the CE were better in that regard, because if this CE were all attack stat, this CE would actually be pretty huge. So you can see it's starting battle at 50% gauge at MLB, critical damage by 10%, and arts and buster performance by 10%. That is just a lot of nice effects right there. So the only issue is just that it's not all attack stat, kind of disincentivizes you from leveling it up, but still, definitely an interesting CE nonetheless. That's pretty much all there is in terms of talking about it here, although we can briefly mention Greatest Ocean, as it is a somewhat rare 4-star CE that is all attack scaling, gives arts up, NP damage up, but also overcharge. So if you needed a budgetary overcharge CE, one that's a 4-star rather than a 5-star, this could be a decent option for you, just depending. So it wouldn't be the worst CE to have sort of in the back of your kind of list there for a weird situation that called for it. But again, that is the Imaginary Scramble main interlude banner there. Here we've got the Singularity Repair Support campaign. I do believe we get summoning campaigns with this. Again, all Arc 1's main quests go to 0 AP here from this, and it is really, really nice as long as you're managing to get it done during the duration. You can see this does last for over a month. I believe it was at this point in time that they were really desperately trying to get people to finally finish LB6 to get caught up, do 6.5, and actually make it to 7. That is the big thing that they knew was coming at that point in time, so they desperately wanted the community to do it, because that has been an issue for JP over the years, is actually getting people to complete the story. So now this Singularity Repair Support campaign is going to largely focus on kind of going back, revisiting all the singularities, and giving you an opportunity to roll for all the units. Again, you can see, just due to the way that the rate-ups are going to be handled, that you will have some that are kind of going to end up being somewhat better than others. It may just come down to the pairings and what you want to see. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I'm going to go through this with you guys. But I'm probably going to go a little bit faster here in this segment, because a lot of these are permanent units we've already covered. A lot of these are low-star units that we haven't covered. And so at the end of the day, I'm just going to kind of give you guys the sort of pointers that I think are relevant and necessary to understand about these banners. Remember, banners like this, a lot of people will call them bait banners, but they're probably not in the grand scheme of things if you're a newer player. It really just depends on who you're after and what your goals are. Again, maybe you're like coming up against a banner that people would tell you is a bait banner, but there's really good writers and you don't have any writers. So there is that possibility always. Just keep that in the back of your head, that there may be certain circumstances to really kind of tilt the scales in your favor. So right here on summoning campaign number 1, we've actually done both John and Jalter. We haven't talked about Marie Antoinette. Earlier, I did talk about the fact that I think Marie is a decent sort of unit, and that basically she has sort of this almost 5-star counterpart in Europa nowadays. She is quick AoE. She has come a long way. Again, I'm going to go a little bit faster on this one. You can see she has had the upgrade to increase her charm to 80%. And basically, instead of it being a male enemy, it is now everyone, which is really, really nice. And then an increase to the party's attack for 3 turns, because she really just didn't have a lot in the way of firepower. You can see here the big thing is the fact that she grants herself invincibility for 3 attacks. No expiration there, so a really, really nice, solid defensive skill. It just makes her a really tanky unit. She also has got the healing per turn for 5 turns, and then basically a self-heal that also increases her own mental debuff success rate. Her NP has had its interlude, and it deals damage to all enemies and removes the entire party's buffs while increasing the party's critical damage now at 20% for 3 turns, and then basically recovers the entire party's HP by up to 1,000. So again, the damage has somewhat been lackluster over the years, but it's gotten some improvement, and she is still a very tanky, very good challenge unit. But she is permanent, so there is that. Lancelot Berserker is still to this day a fantastic looper as long as you're up against 3 enemy waves. He does, ironically enough, have the triple buster deck still as a sort of sign that he is a berserker. I think a lot of people would probably prefer at least the 2nd quick card instead of the 3rd buster, but hey, sometimes triple buster, you gotta just oonga boonga to get the job done. He's only got a 0.5 NP gain rate, and you can see his hit counts are all under average. That is a concern. And the real reason why is you actually don't have to do too much with any of his first 2 skills. You're really going to want to focus on the 3rd skill, though, that he has, that he actually won't have until you've done a strengthening. This skill, basically, when you unlock it, gives him a 100% 1-turn NP gen rate buff. This is absolutely fantastic and great for getting this man to loop. And you're going to want to loop Lancelot mostly nowadays compared to how he was used prior. Prior to the Scotty meta, he was kind of used as this sort of niche crit unit. You can still use him to that degree, but admittedly, it's very RNG and not always a good outcome, since he is a squishy berserker. He's also going to increase his critical damage by 50% for 3 turns. So again, really, really a nice skill here on a 5-turn cooldown. His ability to NP is an AoE quick NP with 10 hits. That is really, really good. It deals damage to all enemies and then will increase his own attack for 3 turns, activating first, which means this is going to keep stacking. This is going to keep getting better, and this is going to allow him to basically just keep getting stronger in a loop. So that's one of the reasons that still to this day, Lancelot Berserker can be good for you. Interestingly enough, you're going to probably want multiple MP levels of him in order to be able to get the job done, especially nowadays with sort of the health bloat on JP nodes, but it is one of the big things basically to kind of focus on with him. Again, if you're trying to use him as a devoted sort of farmer for you, you can use it. Just be careful. There will be situations that Lancelot Berserker does not handle well, particularly nodes that don't have 3 set waves of enemies. So it is what it is. Again, we are going to be talking about Gilles de Rais Saber now here. And just to give you a brief aside, I know a lot of people that think Gilles de Rais Saber is one of the worst units in the game. They basically think he can't ever be fixed. I've actually pointed out that Gilles de Rais Saber is not far off from being 3-star Super Orion, and that's probably actually the route that they should take him at this point. So again, it just kind of remains to be seen. He doesn't have a whole lot really to look forward to in his kit. He's ironically enough got a tactic skill. It's only 16%, but this can actually be used to set somebody else up. Again, the issue is going to be that he's not going to be that good at taking out a wave himself. His second skill here increases his own NP gen rate for 3 turns, and then his third skill here is Buster Up for 5 turns by 40%. So you can see they do want you to card with him. That is his primary goal. Unfortunately, he's only got the 2 Buster cards at 1 hit each, so that's always been a concern with him. And still, I think the real issue lies a little bit in the NP. So his NP, basically, Saint War Order increases his own attack for 2 turns, up to 100% here, which you guys should manage to have, NP5 of him, and then has a 500% chance to reduce his own defense by 50% for 3 turns. This is just a poop demerit that does not need to exist, especially at this point in FGO. This is just absolutely like destroying his ability to hang around in fights, and they definitely need to find a way to get rid of this. His overcharge effect is a crit star bomb, and it is pathetic. I'm sorry, this just absolutely needs to be better. Give this man a Noble Phantasm upgrade. Basically, remove this. Basically, add, like crit damage or something for Buster cards or even all cards. And then make this like a 30 crit star bomb or something like that. And I think you'll see that he'll actually be a lot more fun to use and still not be that broken, because it's not like the man has good attack. Chulainn Caster, on the other hand, at least bears worth mentioning since he is a story-locked unit. As a result, none of you guys are pretty much going to have NP5 unless you've actually devotedly rolled for him. So certainly for collectors, a lot of people will go after Chulainn Caster, also just because they like his googly eyes. Again, he's got a triple arts deck as a buster unit. Welcome to year 1 of FGO. Things were weird. But at the end of the day, triple arts deck is still really strong. The issue at play is he's only got 1 hit arts card, but he does sort of temper that by having a 1.58 NP gain rate. His first skill here is mental debuff resistance and mental debuff success rate. Again, it is what it is. The second skill at least has had its upgrade where it reduced one enemy's servant NP damage for 1 turn, which sucked, to reduce all enemies NP damage for 1 turn. So now it's not specific to servants and it's everybody. And also reduce their arts and buster resist down of 20% each. So this is going to make his NP hit harder. It's going to make him card harder. It's going to make him actually be able to gain more NP as well. His third skill here is just a flat out terror of 1 time 5 turns with a chance to activate the buff, basically to stun them. Unfortunately, the activation chance is what levels up with this skill, and it caps out at 40%. It is not worthy of your lore, and that is still not a good percent. I'd like to see it somewhere up in the like 60% range, maybe with an additional effect added. I think they really can bring these 3 stars up to par yet again, but they've just kind of let them languish for too long. He does get territory creation to help out his 3 arts cards, and then his NP has had an interlude. It is 3-hit AoE NP, deals damage to all enemies, and interestingly enough, charges the NP gauge of foreigner allies by 30%. Unfortunately, he himself is not a foreigner, so he doesn't gain any benefit from that part. But there could be some niche uses of this where he maybe takes out a wave and gives somebody else charge. Again, the issue at play is he doesn't deal a lot of damage, so even if you've got NP5 of him, you may be in a weird sort of point if you don't manage to get him some buffs. But again, who knows? Maybe the first wave or something like that is weak enough for him to be able to kill. He will reduce all enemies' attack for 3 turns and their defense for 3 turns by up to 20% there. Unfortunately, this is after damage, so again, it's going to be good if you're like doing NPs in a sequence or you're going up against the same set of enemies over and over again. Not so good though for, you know, just him killing the wave. So that is your first singularity in a nutshell. You can see the pairings. There are no rate up CEs in this banner. Your next one here is going to end up being the second singularity campaign. We have already covered Altera and basically Waver here. So next up, we've got Stheno, aka Miss Rare Prism. I have always found that nickname funny because in actuality, Stheno's not the worst unit in the game by any means. She's actually got a pretty decent kit, and a lot of people don't actually understand how to use her effectively. I'm not going to say she's the best unit by any means. She certainly isn't, and I do understand where that meme is coming from, but she's not that bad in the grand scheme of things. Got decent attack power. She, interestingly enough, has a triple quick deck, so at least she's going to be decent for star generation. You can see she's got 25% star gen up there, kind of to help that out. 2-hit quick cards there, but only the single arts and buster. So getting to the NP, I think, is going to be a little bit of the issue. That being said, she does have Bloodsucker, which is a chance to reduce one enemy's NP gauge by 1, while also charging her gauge. Unfortunately, the chance to drain is scuffed, and unfortunately, the amount on the charge is scuffed. I'd like to see this get upgraded, round this out at 100% and 30%, and that would help her and still not make her OP. Second skill here is a chance to charm one male enemy for 1 turn. This is okay. It's not the best in all honesty, and what is considered male is somewhat difficult nowadays in FGO, so I'd like to see this get an upgrade as well and maybe just change it to, I don't know, everything. Third skill here increases the party's attack for 3 turns, and really one of her niche uses here also increases the attack of divine allies for 3 turns. And this is where I've actually found some uses for Stheno, is in taking out a wave and basically buffing the rest of the party by maybe even up to 40%. So definitely a strong skill here with this third skill. She does have a Goddess Essence for some stacking, extra flat damage there, and then her Noble Phantasm has had its upgrade. Basically, it has a chance to instant kill one male enemy, has a 150% chance to reduce their defense for 3 turns, and then basically removes their buffs. So I don't like the fact that it removes the buffs after the fact, but it is a thing, and it is there. So the issue at play here is, yes, you might be able to use Stheno to instant kill, but at the end of the day, it is an improvement over how it used to be, basically as they kicked the defense down to her NP level. And why did they do that? The reason they did that is to help combat that rare prism mantra. They wanted to give you an extra reason to have more copies of Stheno, because admittedly, that is partially where it comes from. Having additional copies of Stheno when death was largely viewed as a meme back in the day, not that good of a actual reason to have multiple MP levels, and so some people viewed her as a somewhat useful rare prism in emergencies. I'm going to tell you guys not to do that. It's very difficult to get additional copies of a unit, of any unit nowadays, without rolling a devoted banner for them, so please don't do that. But rare prisms, there's other ways to get them nowadays, and they're not nearly as uncommon as people like to believe. So that usual mentality comes from the early days of FGO and doesn't really apply anymore. Still, the devs found the need to come back in here and actually combat that. And you can see she has the chance to charm one male enemy for 1 turn, up to 100%. You might be asking me, how did I manage to kill an enemy with Stheno's NP? That's how, just death procking them. Stheno has a decently high enough death proc, especially if you manage to have NP5 of her, that, like, yeah, she can actually just consistently death proc certain enemies, and it is hilarious when it happens. So using Stheno to handle a enemy and then basically end up buffing the rest of the party has always been one of the more hilarious uses of her. Next up, we've got Tamamo Cat. She's another unit that's come a long way. She's got still the triple buster deck, but she is an AoE quick berserker for you guys. She's got the 2 turns of attack up, which I do think could be improved, but she at least has gotten an upgrade to her second skill here, which had a chance to reduce one enemy's MP gauge by 60%, which sucked, to basically now a chance to reduce it by 60%, which still sucks, to now it also grants her invincibility for 1 attack over 5 turns. So not the best in terms of a survival skill, but at least it's got a long duration so that, like, you can kind of wait things out, and that is going to help resolve the squishiness of this character somewhat. Her third skill also has had its upgrade. It's her shapeshift that used to just increase her own defense by 27% for 3 turns. So now it still does that, but also increases the max HP by 2,000 and grants her debuff immunity for 1 turn. This was a game changer for Tamamo Cat because of the way her NP works. Having that debuff immunity, really, really good for her. Again, you're going to want to make sure you trigger that on a turn that you NP, otherwise you might regret it. Can see her Noble Phantasm is a 5-hit NP that deals damage to all enemies. It has had its upgrade, but basically it has a 500% chance to stun herself for 2 turns as a demerit. This also sucks. No one likes this, but it is what it is. She basically goes for a nap. So it makes sense lore-wise to have this. That's where, again, having the debuff immunity means that she will just not stun herself, so you're good. She will recover her own HP every turn for 3 turns by up to 3,000, so that is also nice. You do not have to be asleep to get this effect. So really a decent unit at least being able to keep going and kind of like just being able to persist in a node, even though she doesn't have the best survivability. The biggest issue is it's a 0.71 NP gain rate on a 5-hit quick NP. You really need a lot of enemies to hit, and you really need to actually like buffer if you want to have any shot of looping her. And trust me when I say it is not the best loop at all by any means. Also, remember, you've only got the 1 turn of debuff immunity, so subsequent NPs, you're not protected from that, so you might want to take a cleanse. But, again, then you have Alexander here. Alexander is a decent 3-star option for riders. He hits hard, he's got quite a bit of buffs in his kit. You can see he increases the party's attack by 16%. He basically had an upgrade to his second skill, which used to just be Charm against a humanoid enemy, to basically Charm against a humanoid enemy, but now it's at 100%, and also removes their buffs. Having buff removal on a low star unit, really, really good. This is why I tell you guys you should definitely manage to level up your low stars, do all their strengthenings and interludes, because some of them are just budget uses of units that you maybe don't otherwise have in your Chaldea. His third skill here is Omen of the Conqueror. It increases the party's quick performance for 3 turns by 20%. No, this does not actually make him a proper quick support, no matter how many times people try to make this wild claim. It is a nice thing to have. Yes, it can help contribute to damage or NP gen in the party. No, it's not actually good enough to make him even remotely meta. So again, at the end of the day, it's nice that he has it, but it's not that strong of a skill. He does get Riding A+ to kind of help out his quick performance even further, and his NP has had its interlude, but it is sadly only 1 hit. Deals damage to all enemies and then gains crit stars. Good luck looping it. You're gonna need it. You're gonna actually have to try to get him to even generate 10% in order to have a double Oberon work for him, because he's only got the 1 hit on his NP. Still, decently hard hitting. Boudica is a unit that I think has come a long way as well. She just was not good in the early days of FGO, and we can still make an argument that she could use some love still at this point. She is a somewhat supportive unit. She's got double quick, double arts deck, and you can see they've upgraded the first skill, which used to just increase her damage against Roman enemies for 3 turns by 60%. So an odd 3 turn 60% power mod gets upgraded to basically increasing the party's damage against Roman enemies by 60% for 3 turns, and the party's critical damage by 50% for 3 turns, giving her a very nice upgrade. The second skill here just used to be a Guts of 1 time 5 turns. It is still that now with more HP, and basically it will also increase their max HP. Sorry, it was the exact same HP as before, but it is now targetable, and it will basically allow her to also heal the target with max HP, which is, again, not going to care how much HP you have. Max HP is always effective in that regard, so really, really nice. Just make sure it doesn't get buff blocked. But again, a really somewhat decent support skill, having a targetable guts there. And then her third skill is Party Arts Performance by 20% for 3 turns. I, honest to God, think you could strengthen this and it would help out, but at the end of the day, it is what it is. They probably don't want their 3-star to be too strong, and I don't think anyone would ever make that claim with Boudica. She's just a very niche option and decent at that. Her NP has had its NP interlude. It increases the party's defense by NP level, which you guys should have NP 5 of her. I think they could certainly buff this up. Again, maybe give her a second NP interlude. I don't know, but I'm going to say the party-wide defense at only 20% there is not that strong. Thankfully, she does get the further party defense for 1 turn of 20% on the overcharge. Still, that in and of itself is okay. I'm going to say nowadays, though, we have units flying around with much greater defense percentages. It's also going to increase the party's attack for 3 turns now by 20%. So again, another nice thing here, but it is not an offensive NP. It's just supportive. I would actually like to see this NP maybe have like a healing component or something to it as well. If they don't want to go harder in the defense category, maybe allow her to actually provide some amount of sustain, so that she could be like a low-star rider support that people could somewhat take in a lot more challenged environments. Otherwise, right now, I think she's just very much a niche unit. That's going to be your pairings, basically, for this second singularity. Now on to the third one. Third one here, we have already managed to talk about Drake, so we don't have to. So next up here is Anne Bonny and Mary Reed. This is aka the Yuri Pirates, as we like to call them. Yuri Pirates, we already covered the archer form of them. This is the rider form. They're also 1 HP memers. They are, interestingly enough, voiced by Kawasumi, who is the voice of the Sabers. The Artoria faces. They have a double quick, double arts sort of setup here. And I think for a long time, while they were somewhat decent, they struggled at least to really find their own due to how they were designed. So you can see the first skill started out with just a crit generation buff of 50% for 3 turns. Then it gets upgraded to grant them the gut status that they desperately craved and needed. That allowed them to be utilized a lot more effectively for 1 HP memes. It basically allowed them to really pop off in terms of their damage. Also gave them a taunt, basically, so that everyone would attack them, so that if you didn't want to chin gong them, you could maybe just get them attacked down to low health. And then increase the own NP generation rate by 30% for 3 turns and critical star generation rate by 50% still. So really a decent upgrade there. The second skill used to just be crit damage for 1 turn of 100%. Definitely a strong skill in that regard, but very much a one-off. Then it ends up getting upgraded to have a crit star bomb of 25 stars. Excellent for them because, again, they weren't necessarily the best of star generators, only a 9.1% rate. Again, writers are more known for their ability to soak the stars, not so much generate them. So definitely nice that they gave them a star bomb there. And then the third skill is an increase to their own attack by 30% for 1 turn and star absorption to help that out regardless. So really, really good there that they have that. I think they're in a much better spot thanks to this. You can see they've also had their NP interlude. It's a 6-hit single target NP that deals damage to 1 enemy and then further deals damage with overcharge due to the amount of health they have remaining. So the less health they have, the more damage they do. Again, you can see it is a very nice modifier being stacked on top. So they will do some crazy damage potentially for you. But it just requires a little bit of setup. Are they the most useful unit? No, not really. They don't end up having the charge or really even the hard survival in their kit. So that, I think, is kind of the issue at play. They do have the guts, but again, it is what it is. So I think the Yuri Pirates are definitely better than they used to be, but still the game is somewhat evolved from where they currently stand. Medea Lily. Medea Lily is a somewhat rare story-locked unit hailing from Okeanos. A lot of people really just struggle to get their hands on her, I think, and even by the time they do, usually they manage to have rolled somebody else that may or may not be more useful. She has a triple arts deck. The NP gain rate is actually absurdly low, but this is because of the hit counts being good, and also because of the fact that she has a charge skill that will charge her more than 100%. You only need to take this skill to rank 4 in order to be able to charge her up to full. You can take it higher if you want to lower the cooldown, or you want to have a shot at getting to basically overcharge rank number 2, but I don't necessarily recommend it. Her second skill has had its upgrade. It removed the party's poison debuffs and recovered their HP to now basically it increases the amount of HP that it gave. This is nice because I think this is her spot heal outside of her NP, her ability to keep the party up while she can't get to her NP. Sadly, I feel like this way of approaching healing is largely antiquated, but we can talk about that as we get to the NP itself. Her third skill has had its upgrade. It used to increase one ally's healing received by 100% for 1 turn to now basically also increasing their buff removal resistance for 3 turns by 100%. This is a nice upgrade. I know what I've said before about like, hey, if only one unit can have the buff removal resistance, it's not that good. I still stand by that, but at least this is a targetable skill, so you could put this on who you wanted basically to have this. So again, it's entirely possible that you maybe have a unit that has their own buff removal resistance. You take this, put it on someone else, and then you maybe either sacrifice that someone else, or you sacrifice Medea Lily to an enemy NP that you know is coming, and basically have everybody else kind of stay alive. So it is what it is, but again, I do think this has some niche uses. Basically, her NP has had its upgrade as well, and you can see it's a support NP that will cleanse the entire party, then recover their HP by number of NP levels you have. 6,000 is a lot. 4,000 though is still a decent chunk, and it will also increase the party's debuff resistance by up to 40% for 3 turns. So really not a bad NP. So why did I say that this is antiquated? The reason why is it is usually a lot better to have a much more automated form of healing if you can. And what I mean by that is someone like, say, Merlin, where you're just getting constant healing over time. You just pop the NP. The NP gives a lot of other good beneficial offensive effects, and you don't have to worry too much about healing over time. And it just kind of ends up pushing this to this like sort of well-maintained category that you can kind of take your mind off of and focus on taking the fight to the enemy. Instead, this form of healing ends up being very reactionary. You very much have to wait for the enemy to do a good chunk of damage to you and then try to heal it. I, for one, think that in FGO, it is much better to prevent damage first and foremost than to have to ever try to heal through it. So prevention, then again, if you can manage to automate it over time, and last is going to be the sort of responsive way of dealing with it, which runs the risk of maybe you just flat out died to the enemies in P or something like that. You didn't weather the storm. So again, I do think Medea Lily can be very strong. I've actually seen people do some hilarious stuff in solos with her, but at the end of the day, I think usually a lot of people are going after her because they either like the character or they want the collection copy, not necessarily because of how strong she is as a character at this point in time. Can still be absolutely used. She is still a very powerful healer, but that is all she is in that regard, is a powerful healer. I once had a friend that referred to her as a tickle monster, and that absolutely holds true. It's not like she's got a lot of offensive firepower. Next up, we've got David. David is basically our Giant Slayer. He's come a long way. He's another Buster unit with a triple arts deck. He's a good 3-star. He basically has the ability to increase his own defense by 50% for 1 turn. You don't have to level the skill to get that effect, which is nice. Instead, leveling it gets you the healing basically for himself. He also has Harp of Healing, as I've referred to throughout this entire video, basically removing the party's mental debuffs, so not all debuffs, then granting them evasion for 1 attack. You'll notice it doesn't have an expiration timer on it, so again, it's basically there until the enemy actually does try to hit them, and then recovers the party's HP by 800. So not the strongest heal, but it is something. Again, even just for the purposes of dodging an NP, that skill can absolutely save your party. Again, his third skill here will increase the party's attack by 18% for 3 turns, and his NP has had its NP interlude, which is nice. It basically ignores evasion for 1 turn, activating first, deals damage to 1 enemy, and then deals 200% super effective damage to a giant enemy. The overcharge effect will also seal their skills for 1 turn, which has some interesting applications. So definitely really a good unit against giants. Even against non-giant enemies, Davy can still be serviceable and still help keep the party alive when an enemy NP ends up kind of barreling down on you. And basically that's going to be your 3rd campaign. For some odd reason, they chose not to actually post the schedule for this one, but I can assume it's just simply because everybody is on rate up with Drake. Then we get to the 4th singularity, aka London. We have already covered Mordred and Jack the Ripper. So next up, we've got Nursery Rhyme, as I meant to call her. Basically the book, as a lot of people will refer to her as well, is a arts AoE caster. She's got triple arts in here. She deals medium damage by the game's own definition, which is not very strong. That's going to be not really the reason that you're using her. She's not going to be dealing that much damage for you. It's going to be more everything else that she kind of does. So she can increase her own critical damage for 3 turns by up to 50% and star absorption for 3 turns by 600%. Again, the star absorption here basically not too great. Casters don't have a very high rate, so this could absolutely use an upgrade. Second skill here increases her own defense by 30% for 1 turn, and then increases her own defense for 3 turns by an additional 30%, making her quite tanky. This is again shapeshift in a nutshell, just like Tamamo has, but then also increasing her own debuff resistance for 3 turns by 40%, making her harder to land debuffs on. Her 3rd skill here charges her own NP gauge by 40%, an odd increment, but still welcome on an arts unit. Recovers her own HP by up to 2,000, and then removes her own debuff. So even if you do get a debuff landing on you, you can cleanse it right off. Does get Territory Creation A, and again, her Noble Phantasm has had its upgrade already, and basically is a 3-hit AoE NP. It deals damage to all enemies, reduces their defense by 20% for 3 turns, and then has an overcharge effect that has a chance to reduce their NP gauge by 1. This is actually what is really nice about Nursery Rhyme, is she is an AoE arts looping, AoE draining caster. So I have utilized Nursery Rhyme quite hilariously in certain stally challenge fights, where I basically just took in the support to help keep her alive and just had her sit there draining and looping. You combine her with someone like Waver back in the day as well, and you managed to have quite a bit of drain going on in the party, and it was pretty hilarious to watch at how effective it could be. I actually utilized a Waver Nursery Rhyme comp to get through the old Hassan challenge quests, where you had to defeat a whole bunch of them, and it worked out really effectively in that regard. You can still do stuff like that to this day. It's not going to deal a whole lot of damage. It'll be slow, it'll be plodding, but it will kill, and that is definitely a good use for Nursery Rhyme. Still, she's definitely fallen behind in terms of damage. She doesn't really provide a whole lot of support, so I don't really recommend devotedly rolling for her. Lancer Alter, oh boy. So again, full disclaimer, waifu is Artoria. Particularly, I love the Lancer form, Lartoria. Lalter, definitely just the edgy version of that. Lalter is a really interesting unit in the fact that she has always been very similar to Salter, just sort of top dog in the AoE Lancer category amongst 4-stars. Even on paper, you can see her pretty much at the top of the list at this point. Certainly, though, the issue resolves around, 1, having NP levels of her because she is a story-locked unit, and 2, actually having the ability to 3-turn. At first, she really couldn't, and she was utilized more for clearing a wave and then critting enemies down with her insanely good crit skill that has been the prototype for every other crit skill that's pretty much come after it. Again, she's got double quick, double buster, basically the standard Lancer deck here. At least decent hit counts on the arts card where she would need it. And she's had an upgrade here to her mana burst that used to be a buster up of 1 turn of 55%, to now it is buster up of 55% for 3 times 3 turns. I hate this. Stop doing this, devs. Just make it 3 turns. This limitation is dumb. But I kind of understand, because Lalter has some pretty insane firepower. This will also now charge her NP gauge by 20%. This does allow her to be able to 3-turn with double Oberon, as again, any unit now in the game that can get at least 10% charge can be made to 3 turn. So yes, you will be starting her out with something weird like a MLB K-scope, or just a like K-scope with a maxed out mana loading. Good luck on the coins, but it is what it is. Still, it is a very strong 3 turn for her, as she just naturally has quite a bit of damage. Just be careful that you don't like pre-card or end up having to post-card an NP with one of the buster cards there. Her second skill increases her critical star absorption for 1 turn by 1,000, increases her own critical damage for 1 turn by 50, and gains her crit stars of 10. It is an all-in-one crit skill. This doesn't seem that OP nowadays, but it is the model that they use to go on to Beowulf, and then frequently after Beowulf, even more newer units have skills like this. So it is just pretty much as ideal as it can be. Her star absorption is not the best as a Lancer, but certainly it is also not the worst, so 1,000 should be a decent amount. It will not soak every star, but it is still very strong for her. Her third skill here is her Charisma. It basically was party attack up of 3 turns by 12%, and then in the ultimate cock tease, the devs decided to tease the Wild Hunt, which is a interesting aspect to her lore that they have never explored, but I digress. The whole point is now it increases the party's attack up by 20%, which is great, and then also increases her own damage against lawful and good alignment enemies for 3 turns by 30% each. Hilariously enough, she herself is lawful and good. I'm not sure I necessarily understand that one, but it is what it is. Still, really, really nice niches there. Absolutely added some great firepower, and that is why Lolter still, amongst the 4 stars, remains on top. Her NP has had its interlude. Hilariously enough, it deals damage that ignores defense buffs to all enemies, has a 60% chance to NP seal them, and will inflict curse for 5 turns to them of up to 1,000 damage. The curse is okay, it's not that good. The NP seal, if you get it, you get it. But again, at the end of the day, you're more after damage and crit power with Lolter. So yes, she is still absolutely a fantastic unit. You're going to struggle basically to amplify the damage more due to her charge situation. But again, it is still very strong to this day. Jekyll and Hyde. Oh boy. Man, if there's a unit out there that I think the devs just absolutely missed the mark on, it's this one. I think Jekyll and Hyde is the most disappointing unit in FGO. I'm not going to call him the worst. I'm not going to call him, unusable or anything like that. I think he's just disappointing. And the reason why is because I think it's a very cool character, and it's a very cool concept. Jekyll and Hyde's entire ability is being able to shift between his assassin form and his berserker form. The problem is, it's just a very lopsided kit that just does not work out. The way they handled this is just abysmal. You can see he gets different stats depending on which form he's in. Again, different alignments, everything is different. So it's effectively 2 different units in 1 unit. He's got double quick, double buster deck here. His first skill increases his own attack for 3 turns, and then as Hyde, the berserker form, further increases his own attack by up to 35%. Do you notice how bad this is? This is definitely an issue where when he's in his assassin form, he only gets 15%. When he's in his berserker form, he gets 50. You are 100% incentivized to never use Hyde in assassin form. It is just inherently worse. That's the problem that they have with this. I think they could have done this better. They could have approached it from a standpoint of a unit kind of moving back and forth, becoming Jekyll, becoming Hyde, becoming Jekyll, becoming Hyde, and then basically being able to get different effects at play depending on what's going on there. But the way Jekyll currently stands, it is just absolutely better to use every single one of his skills as Hyde, as his berserker form. So you can see his second skill increases his own stun success rate for 1 time by 15%, as Hyde further increases it by 135%. This is just crap. Otherwise, he has a 10% chance to stun 1 enemy for 1 turn. So, 25% chance to, 160. Third skill here increases his own critical damage for 3 turns by 15%, as Hyde further increases it by 35. So again, you can see the trend here. They did come back in and upgrade this skill and basically said, hey, as long as you are Jekyll, aka the assassin form, you will charge your own NP gauge by 80% when you use the skill. This is bad, and the reason it's bad is because while this gets him to hide faster, it means you have to use this skill as Jekyll and then wait for it to come back in order to be able to utilize it as Hyde. It's kind of tone deaf. They just really need to go back in and rework this unit from the ground up. If there is any unit in the game that needs it, it's Jekyll and Hyde. Do not roll for Jekyll and Hyde. There's no point to it. He's a permanent unit. You can get him in the FP pool, but it is what it is. The other issue at play is he has had his NP interlude. You can see the Noble Phantasm can't be used when he's in Berserker form. There's a 500% chance to change his own class to Berserker. So basically, it can change him to Berserker, but once he's Berserker, you can't use it. That's stupid. It should have some effect, either changing him back into Assassin or I don't know what. Like, either way, it should do something, basically, if you get back to his NP again. Has a 500% chance to increase his own max HP permanently by, again, up to 6,000, which is a strong heal. And then has a 500% chance to increase his own Buster performance permanently by 40%, basically. So this could all be really good. I would just absolutely love to see him go back into Assassin, then be able to trigger the third skill again, basically to get him more charge, so that you spend time in each form, keep getting back, keep stacking buffs, and then he becomes this, like, he's really weak at first, but he's this unstoppable juggernaut as he gets going. That would be way better of a concept. And I can think of that, so I know the devs haven't not thought of that sort of thing. They just haven't done it, and that's why he's disappointing. Next up is Babbage. Babbage here is a pretty solid AoE Buster caster. I think his biggest issue nowadays at this point is he has just gotten completely left behind by the monster that is Coup Caster. He's got double arts, double Buster deck here. He's got a 0.9 NP1 gain rate. 0.91 NP gain rate. I don't know why I mixed that up. Increases his own NP generation rate by 30% for 3 turns, and then increases his own critical star absorption for 1 turn there by 1,000. The second skill here has had its upgrade. It increases his own attack for 3 turns now by 40% with a hard survival invincibility there of 1 turn. And his third skill has also had its upgrade where it increases his own NP damage for 3 turns by 25%, crit damage by 100% for 1 turn, and has a chance to inflict an unstackable burn to himself while gaining crit stars. So the biggest issue you're going to have is being able to soak the stars to him at only 0.48. Again, you can see he did get the 1,000 there, but you're going to be struggling there at 0.48 with that. We already talked about Lotto earlier, how she had a 1,000 star soak and does not soak everything, and that was with 90 star absorption. So again, the issue with Babbage generating and soaking the stars, he at least has everything in his kit to help with it, but yeah, it just still may not work out too well for you. Again, his NP has had its NP interlude. He's 4-hit AoE, deals damage to all enemies, and then simply reduces their defense after for 3 turns. He's a very simple, straightforward unit. He's not bad, but again, at this point, he's just getting trounced by some of the crazy upgrades that we've seen. You can see the banner pairings here. Lotto will be on rate up with Jack. This is a relatively rare rate up for Lotto. She is the only 4-star on that banner. If you want her, go after her there. I do recommend it. Otherwise, it's somewhat difficult to acquire her. Summoning campaign number 5, we've actually already talked about Queen Maeve and Coup Alter. We've also talked about Thomas Edison. So let's skip right here to Finn McCool. That's the best way to say this name. Don't say it the other way. Basically, Fion has come a long way. He essentially is an arts AoE looper, but the way he started out, he was one of the worst units with regards to how he was designed. So you can see he started out with crit star gen rate of 38% for 3 turns on an arts unit, just rather weird pairing. They changed it up to give him crit star generation rate for 3 turns of 50%, party NP gen rate of 30% for 3 turns, so nice party application, but also helping his loop ability there. Second skill was a self-evasion, which grants a chance to evade each attack for 1 turn of 100%. This sucked. You had to lure it in order for it to have a 100% chance to succeed, and who knows, maybe the enemy just has sure hit or invuln and pierce. Again, chance to draw attention to all enemies for self for 1 turn, and then a chance to reduce his own charm resistance to female enemies. Thankfully, they came back in and they upgraded this and just said, you know what, this skill does suck. What if we just gave it 30% charge and reduced the insane 10-turn cooldown on a shit skill to 7 turns? They made this skill a lot more palatable. His third skill, still to this day, arts up of 1 turn of 40%. I do think they could maybe help that out with multi-turn duration, but it is what it is. I'm not going to sit there and cry foul or ask for it too much because Fionn is a decent looper at this point. In fact, with that in mind, Fionn can actually manage to outperform some of his other contemporaries, especially if you have higher MP levels of him. I've often compared him to Melt Lancer, who is a limited unit, whereas Fionn is permanent, so it is entirely possible to just have more copies of Fionn than her, and maybe have him actually outperform her. That being said, you have Percival nowadays that's also lying around and just has a much more fluid and easy to use kit, so it is what it is. He has had his NP Interlude as a 3-hit AoE NP that deals damage to all enemies and then grants himself mental debuff immunity. He's also going to reduce the enemy's attack for 3 turns, so not bad. Again, he's come a long way. He's a lot better than how he used to be, so I recommend everybody hail Fionn. Just not too much. Robin Hood's next up. Still to this day, Robin Hood hits hard. We really don't have to say that much more about him. He's had some decent upgrades, and I think you'll see that he still has a solid kit. He's got a 0.87 NP gain rate here. His arts crits can absolutely get him back to full. Again, 2-hit arts card there. His first skill has been basically set to a better status now at this point. Reduces all enemies' attacks for 3 turns, and then basically inflicts poison of 500 damage to them for 5 turns with all enemies. Just make sure you have some way of applying poison. He's really going to want it. His second skill increases his own NP gen rate by 30% for 3 turns. Make sure you have this on when you're NPing and carding with him. And then his third skill here is an evasion, ignore evasion for 1 turn, and then a self evasion of 1 turn with a crit star bomb of 20. So really, really solid. He just doesn't end up having anything to really soak, and that's kind of his issue, even though he does have decent star absorption. Still, his NP, still to this day, one of the harder hitting low star archer NPs. It's a 1-hit arts NP that deals damage to 1 enemy and then deals super effective 200% modifier damage to poison status enemies. Functionally ends up doubling the amount of damage he does. He still easily is the 3-star archer to beat in that category, and it usually requires somebody to be really in niche in order to beat him. Honestly, Robin Hood still to this day can outpunch 4 and even 5 stars in the right set of circumstances, so do not overlook him. He is an excellent budget option for you. Geronimo is a big meme at this point. A lot of people think Geronimo's bad. He's actually not. Don't ever let anyone tell you that Geronimo is a bad unit. He is actually pretty good. His issue is his kit is the most boring kit amongst all servants ever created, pretty much. And to make that pretty clear, you can see he's got a 0.9 NP gain rate. He has his first skill, a buster up of 1 turn of 50%. His second skill, an arts up of 1 turn of 50%. Can you guess the third skill? Yeah, it's a quick up of 1 turn of 50%. It's not that these steroids are bad. They're actually pretty decent. It's just that they're just completely, thoughtless. The devs just did not do anything with this kit. They absolutely phoned it in, and that's why people are actually begging for him to get an upgrade. It's not that he's bad. It's that his kit is just the most boring thing imaginable. His NP has had its interlude, deals damage to all enemies, is a 1-hit NP, has a chance to reduce their attack basically by 20% for 3 turns, but then it also heals the party by 1,000 and increases the party's debuff resistance. So interestingly enough, Geronimo can kind of loop and managed to keep the party alive. Yeah, I know I just said he's got a one-hit Arts NP. I don't care. You can actually force that to 3-turn. It's hilarious. It's not good, but it's hilarious. So again, Geronimo's NP damage actually decently solid. He's still going to get beaten by the likes of Caster, but ultimately at the end of the day, he's a serviceable unit as well. Just, again, very, very boring kit. So, summoning campaign. Sorry, let's go back to this real quick and show you guys the pairings here. Again, you can see Fion is going to be paired with Mabe, whereas Ku is going to get Edison. Definitely a nice pairing there since the two of them are both story locked. Summoning campaign number 6 is literally Edmond Dantes. We already covered him before now, so we don't have to mention anything here. But again, this is another shot at a limited unit. Summoning campaign number 7, we have already talked about Ozymandias. He is a very, very solid option. So we have, in fact, already covered Ozymandias. What we haven't covered, though, are the Knights of the Round. So each one of them is a story-locked unit. Gawain is an interesting option nowadays. We certainly have Barghest, and I think Gawain's kind of gotten done dirty in relation to Barghest. He does have one edge on her, but otherwise Barghest pretty much has the entire rest of her kit, and obviously the attraction of, you know, being a busty female that a lot of people are going to go for. That being said, Gawain is the epitome of a himbo, and in the best way imaginable. He's got a triple buster gorilla deck here. He ends up having an increase to his own attack by 20% for 3 turns, and then further a buster up of 30% for 3 turns if he's on a sunlight battlefield. The second skill here started out as a party-wide attack up for 3 turns of only 12%, and then became Knightless Charisma, which ends up basically increasing it to 20%, and then also granting him the sunlight battlefield buff for 1 turn. So Gawain can bring the sun. That is the advantage that he ends up having over a unit like Barghest. His third skill here will charge his gauge by 20%. This is unfortunate because it just means that you can 3-turn with him, but only with double Oberon. But it is still an option, and you may be able to just have him sort of take out a wave with maybe some party charge flying around, so it's not too bad of an issue. He can gain critical stars as well with this and grant himself a guts of 1 time 1 turn. This needs an upgrade simply because what the hell? 1 time 1 turn. Why is it that bad? Just give it 3 turns at minimum. Give it multiple turn durations just to help him out being used in challenge environments. Again, it is what it is. His Noble Phantasm has had its upgrade as well. It is a 4-hit AoE NP that deals damage to all enemies, seals their skills for 1 turn, and then further increases the critical damage of his buster cards by 50% on Sunlight Battlefield for 3 turns, and then increases his own critical star absorption by 300% on Sunlight Battlefield for 3 turns. This means that he's only going to have it on the 1 turn you have Sunlight Battlefield, unless you're actually on a battlefield that has sunlight, and then he's just going to actually be carding really hard. He will inflict burn of 5 turns for them of 1,000 there. So again, not too much there. His NP isn't that powerful, but it is in a much better place than it used to be, given the fact that he has had the NP interlude. So again, I do think Gawain is very serviceable, but still somewhat clunky and does need another look, especially in comparison to Barghest. Tristan is another unit that I'm going to immediately compare to Balbon Sith there. Sort of the immediate LB6 comparisons were inevitable here at this point. He's not a bad unit. He's got double quick, double arts there. And again, a 9.7k attack up there. His Harp of Healing has had an upgrade. It used to just be mental debuff cleanse there, and then an evasion of 1 attack with no expiration, as well as 600 healing. So not quite as good as David's. But now they gave him a unique variant here that also increases his quick performance by 30% for 3 turns, giving him a steroid when he didn't have any in his kit prior to that point. Removes the entire party's debuffs, not just mental, and recovers the party's HP now by up to 1,000. So they kind of just recognized that it was a very weak variant of the skill. The second skill here still charges his MP gauge and has a chance to seal his own NP by 500%. So it's a 50% charge skill. You have to be careful either to not use this the turn you want to NP, or to use it before his first skill so that you can cleanse it off. His third skill removes one enemy's buffs. This has always been one of the advantages to using Tristan. Having that is really, really nice, and reduces their critical attack chance for 3 turns by up to 20%. Again, Tristan has still a pretty decent kit. The only issue that I have is that Balbon has sort of the better challenge kit, especially at survival, at staying up. Again, Tristan really only has that first skill in that regard. The second skill is a self-MP seal instead of NP sealing the enemy like Balbon Sith does. So I certainly would like to see him get another glance over, even if they don't want to really amp his damage too much. His NP has had its interlude. It is a 7-hit single target NP that basically grants sure hit and then also ignores defense buffs on the enemy. It's also going to reduce their debuff resistance for 3 turns by 30%, making it easier basically for him to manage to do other things, like reduce the critical attack chance. But that's really all he does, because everything else is kind of just baked in. So again, I do think Tristan is a very usable unit to this day still. He is very comparable with Balbon Sith. Just, I think she still kind of has an edge over him in a lot of ways. Whereas I would like to see the Knights of the Round and the Fairy Knights in somewhat parity, just with points of differentiation. Bedivere here has also gotten some nice love. He is a unit that you will have at least 1 copy of if you've completed Camelot, but certainly getting additional copies of him can be somewhat difficult. This will not be a bad opportunity to try and acquire him here. Again, he is a Buster single target Saber. He does actually do quite a bit of damage there. He does have the double Buster cards to help him out. His military tactics got an upgrade along the time that a lot of the tactics were getting upgrades, and you can see it's now increasing the party's NP damage for 3 turns by 20%, whereas before it was just the party's NP damage for 1 turn by 16. It's also going to increase the party's NP gen rate by 30% for 3 turns, giving him some utility there, as he can provide a steroid and NP gain capabilities to another unit of the party. His second skill here will charge his own gauge by 30% on a 6-turn cooldown. So yes, that does mean that you can 3-turn with him in a double Koyanskya Oberon setup. Kinda hilarious, especially since the first skill has a 5-turn cooldown, meaning you could activate it on turn 1 and then turn 2. So really a nice one, and then also increasing his mental debuff resistance. His third skill here increases the party's defense by 30% for 1 turn, and increases the party's debuff resistance by 1 turn, basically even further. That is what's going to level with the skill. So again, you can choose to level the skill up or not. It's really not that imperative, just depending on how you're using him. His NP has had its interlude. It's a 2-hit single target NP. It deals damage to 1 enemy and then increases their own Buster performance for 1 turn, basically by 1%, or sorry, basically by 30%. Sorry, my brain is just beginning to turn circles over doing all of these. But again, it's a really, really strong and capable unit. Doubly so if you can kind of follow up that NP with the Buster cards there to gain the effect of the Buster up. So I do recommend Bedivere as long as you can get more copies of him. That is what's really going to allow him to stand out as a budget unit and a awesome sort of capable sort of support in that regard as well. So again, he's a 3-star. He's limited. This will not be a bad banner to roll. All the Knights of the Rounds are pretty good in that regard, and Ozzy is absolutely stellar going forward. So this is a sneakily good banner tucked in here. Summoning campaign number 8 here is for Enkidu, who we have already covered, and Kets, who we have already covered. So next up on the list here is Medusa Lancer. Medusa Lancer, aka Anna, is basically an interesting unit. She is single target quick, and she is not bad, especially in the grand scheme of things for single target Lancers. She's got the double quick cards, but then also managed to have 2 4-hit arts cards. The downside is her NP gain rate is kept low because they feared her. She had charm to 1 male enemy basically, and then instead it basically got up to 100% so that it didn't have that chance of failure if you lured it. Also, while adding a steroid that reduced the enemy's quick resistance for 3 turns of 20%. This does mean you're not going to be able to carry it with you through subsequent waves, but still really solid if you're going up against the same enemy over and over again. She gets monstrous strength for an increase to her attack for 1 turn by 30%. Certainly would like to see that at least get upgraded to the 2-turn variant. And then her third skill here started out as a guts of 1 time 3 turns with self-invincibility for 1 attack to basically all that same effect, but then also charging her NP gauge and reducing the cooldown down from the 7 turns that it was. So really, really nice in that regard. Certainly allows her to be able to be used a little bit more effectively now that she has charge, and that's kind of what I think the devs fear about her. You can see she has had her NP interlude as an 8-hit single target quick NP that deals damage to 1 enemy and reduces their quick resistance by 20% for 3 turns. Again, stacking that quick down. She also has a chance to stun them for 1 turn of 80%, which is a very hefty rate there. And that's why I said the devs fear her, is because she has stun and she has charm in her kit here. So she very well, hilariously enough, can stun lock and charm lock units, provided they are vulnerable to it. That's why she can actually be somewhat effective as a single target Lancer, and her damage is not bad. Again, the issue is going to be, can you actually loop her? That's just going to come down to your sort of supporting of her, but I do think she can be a decent unit still. Gorgon is a story locked unit, and very infamously the unit that got Korea in trouble when the devs of Korea managed to tweak the banner rates for her. Regardless, she is somewhat difficult to get your hands on. She doesn't get a whole lot of rate ups, so this may be a decent opportunity to roll. She's got 10k attack. She is an AoE Buster Avenger. Got the 2 Buster cards there in her deck and a 5-hit Arts card. Her monstrous strength started out as the 1-turn variant of 50% and got upgraded to 4 attacks over 2 turns, basically of 50% there, and then increasing her own critical star absorption of Buster cards for 1 turn by 600. This is a nice upgrade, but this is still a very clunky skill. It's very limiting in how it can be used. Her second skill is gut status 1 time 5 turns. It also increases her own critical damage for 3 turns, basically by 50%. And her third skill here is just Mystic Eyes A+ with a chance to petrify that will scale up over 100% if you lure it. But remember, just because it's over 100% does not guarantee that it will succeed, as again, you can have units that have magic resistance and stuff like that coming into play. She is an AoE Avenger that has had her NP interlude though, and thus she has a 3-hit NP that deals damage to all enemies and then charges the party's NP gauge by a very odd amount of 15%. The good news is, because she has at least 10% charge, she can be made to 3-turn with double Oberon. So for those of you guys that wish to farm with her, you can do so. Though just be careful in the opening first and second waves there, as you're not going to have those Oberon third skills on just yet. You will inflict Curse of 5 turns to them for 1,000 damage here. So again, a decent sort of addition in terms of offense. But I do think Gorgon is a very usable unit nowadays, especially compared to where she should be, or sorry, where she was. So I do like seeing her at this point. They could maybe make her stronger if they want to, but I think they would run into issues compared to maybe the 5-star Avengers at that point. Ushi Rider is a very fantastic unit still to this day. She's very serviceable as far as 3-star riders go. Again, a lot of people point quickly to the NP damage numbers and point out just how much she can rival even 5 stars with those numbers, and that is definitely true. The issue with Ushi is going to be getting her back to another NP. She does have a 0.87 NP gain rate, double quick, double arts deck, but only 2 hit count on them. And again, you can see her first skill started out as just party NP gen rate of 20%. It got upgraded basically to also include quick performance for 3 turns of 20%, kind of helping out that damage and that refund. Her second skill here started out as a party-wide attack up for 3 turns of 17% and got upgraded to 3 turns at 20%, also with crit damage of 3 turns of 50%, with a nice crit star bomb of 20 stars. Thankfully, she is a rider. She's got really high star absorption there at 204, higher than most riders there. So really, really nice for her to have a star bomb. Her third skill here is self-evasion for 1 turn and then crit star gen rate of 100%. So again, you can see she's got the ability to soak and crit harder there. Really, really a decent kit in terms of her crit synergy. Why did I say it's going to be difficult to get her back to an NP? because her NP is one hit. That's it. You not get any more. So the ability to charge off the back end of the NP is going to be suspect. She has had her NP interlude though, increasing the amount of damage. Otherwise, her overcharge effect remains intact here as it just increases critical star generation rate by 50% for 3 turns. So again, generating crit stars with her isn't the problem. Soaking the crit stars with her isn't the problem. You need the cards and you need to crit with them, particularly with the arts cards, in order to have your hopes of getting back to more NPs. You can maybe do it at least once, but getting back to it maybe even a third time is going to be very, very difficult depending on card distribution. So Ushi still hits really hard, really a good 3-star rider, but just be careful with her in terms of trying to assume that she's better than her higher rarity counterparts. Last up here, we've got Jaguar Man. Jaguar Man is another story locked unit. She came out alongside Gorgon. I did wish back when we had the Year of the Tiger that they actually did something for Taiga, but it is what it is. They have given her some love over time that has helped her out, but she's still not the most usable unit. She's a single target Buster Lancer with double Buster deck there, double quick as well. And they ended up coming back into Jaguar Punch here that used to just be Buster up of 3 turns of 30% on a 10-turn cooldown, which was atrocious. And ended up upgrading it, basically still allowing the steroid to remain the same, but basically also granting her the ability to give Forest Battlefield buff for 3 turns to herself, which is a huge boon to her damage. And then a crit star bomb of 30 stars while also reducing the cooldown down to 7 turns. Looks like the devs realized, just like in Fion's case, this was a shit skill and definitely needed its upgrade. Second skill, still a increase to her own attack for 2 turns of 30% there, basically her monstrous strength, her own variant there. And then Jaguar Eye increases her own critical damage by 50% for 3 turns, while further increasing critical star generation rate and critical star absorption for 3 turns if she is on the forest battlefield. So really good that she can provide that. But it doesn't stop there, as her NP is a single target Buster NP that is 2 hits. It will also have sure hit here and basically deal damage to 1 enemy. She's also going to reduce their debuff resistance for 3 turns by 10%. Not a whole lot there. So I think the real thing that I want to see, because I don't think Taiga's that bad in terms of the damage department, but I would really like to see Taiga have some sort of ability to secure getting to another NP, give her some charge, or better yet, give her some NP gain, kind of help her keep working as maybe a carding and challenge unit. But it really just depends. I still would like to see them really lean in on that Forest Battlefield buff, as she's one of the only units that really utilizes it. Again, you can see the pairings here. You've got Enkidu with Medusa Lancer there. So kind of cursed that they paired single target Lancers with each other. But then you've got basically all of the story locked units paired with each other, which is really a tantalizing banner because of that. These are rare units. They're all paired up together. This is a solid banner for those of you guys that did not roll on the original Babylonia campaign. And last but not least here, we get to summoning campaign number 9. This is going to be basically our Singularity Repair end campaign for the Epics of Remnant. So first up here, we've got James Moriarty. He is a very solid single target Buster Archer. I'd like to see Moriarty maybe get some love still down the stretch here. He's only got a 0.38 NP gain rate. He's single target Buster with a triple arts deck. So again, welcome back, but his hit counts are good. Again, you can see they've upgraded his first skill to grant him still the ignore invincibility, but now also ignore defense. Increase his own critical star absorption for 1 turn by 600% and gain crit stars basically of 20, all on a 5-turn cooldown, meaning you can double it up very quickly. His second skill here basically got rid of the stupid bullshit requirements of stars here. You can only use it when there's 10 crit stars or more, but it no longer consumes the stars. It's also going to charge his gauge by 50%, increase his own NP damage by 20% for 3 turns, and now will grant the entire party evil alignment except himself for 3 turns. He doesn't need evil alignment because he is evil. His third skill here will basically now increase the party's attack for 3 turns by 20% and also increase the attack of evil alignment allies except himself by 20% for 3 turns. I wouldn't mind if this also applied to Moriarty, but that would maybe risk breaking him, as he definitely has that Buster synergy going on. So if they did that and then an NP interlude on top of that, he would be in a really crazy state. Still, I would like to see him get his NP interlude. He has a 12 hit single target NP, deals damage to one enemy, and reduces their defense activating first, so you get to take advantage of this with the NP and subsequent cards, and it lasts 3 turns at 20%, so it does stack if you keep going over the same unit over and over and over again. Again, I think with actual Buster synergy there, being able to pair this man with Oberon has really helped him out quite a bit. He is in a much improved state just due to the meta, but certainly that is something to take into consideration as what will happen as the meta shifts. Ches, we've already managed to talk about, so we don't have to cover. Musashi, Saber, we have not managed to talk about yet. Certainly, we've got the Samurai Remnant collab coming out here, so I think a lot of people are going to be hyped to roll for Musashi at some point. She is still a very good unit, but she is still not like the most meta of units. Her damage has never been deniable. It has always been strong. She's got 12k attack, a triple buster deck, pretty good hit counts overall, and certainly has always had the capability to just be able to pump out, you know, just punishment. Her 5th form has had its upgrade now on JP, basically allowing it to double the number of hits when normal attacking for 3 turns instead of 1, increasing the damage when normal attacking for 3 turns instead of 1, and reducing the damage taken for 3 turns instead of 1. The big thing to understand about 5th form is, while yes, it doubles the number of hits, it basically has no downside. So essentially the way this one works, and it's not really well explained in game, but all this is doing is by doubling the number of hits, you're just getting more hits for potential NP gain and crit stars. So it's really, really nice for you to have in that regard. The real actual damage amplification going on is right here on this second line. So again, I think a lot of people get really confused as to how 5th form actually functions. Her second skill here is an Invuln Pierce, which is really solid on a Buster unit, and an increase to her Buster performance of 1 turn by 50%. Again, it's on a 5-turn cooldown, so hey, you might be able to double pop it, but at the end of the day, it's just a strong, solid skill. Third skill is her Hard Survival with self-invincibility for 1 turn and crit star gen rate for 3 turns, while also cleansing her own debuffs. Really, really good, really nice in a challenge, and certainly allows Musashi to be used somewhat in solo comps, or as well in some form of, you know, just crazy sort of like just high octane boss clearing type of comp. Her NP has had its interlude, and boy is it a doozy. A lot of people reacted like negatively to this NP interlude, saying it was too strong. I cannot imagine anyone in the game crying over something being too strong at this point, especially with a unit that had basically not had any upgrades at the time. None of our single target sabers really had any NP interludes. This was the first time they were seeing that, and I think they reacted negatively because it finally put a saber in the position that a saber always should have been. Still, I understand complaining when it's meta upsetting. In this case, it was not meta upsetting in the slightest. It was just a well-deserved, long overdue buff to Musashi. It is a 7-hit single target NP. It deals damage to 1 enemy, and now deals super effective damage to Alter Ego and Moon Cancer enemies, giving her sort of that extra niche like Kama has against some of these rare extra classes that a lot of people don't have a good solution for. Interestingly enough, I'm really not sure why they decided to pitch in Moon Cancer here, just simply because single target rulers need some love, but it is what it is. I could definitely understand it against Alter Ego because we did not have a lot of solutions to that problem. Again, she will remove their buffs after damage. I wish this were before, but still better late than never. And her overcharge effect will increase her NP damage for 1 turn by 30%. So really a decently solid amount right there. Next up here, we have Abby Williams. Now, this is the single target version of Abby, the OG Abby, if you will. Abby is definitely a solid unit still to this day on JP. I don't think she ever won't be. In fact, I've heard some of my friends describe her as like just a really good unit to take in a boss killing comp. That is to say, whenever you get that question mark node and you have no idea what's going to be in it, Abby usually ends up being a really solid addition to one of those comps. Maybe alongside something like Merlin or something else to try and keep the party alive with sustain, but she usually ends up being kind of a little bit of a Swiss Army knife for people. Right at the bat, you can see she has about 12k attack here. Unfortunately, she only has a 0.25 NP gain rate, which is terrible. And this is basically because they ended up giving her a triple arts deck. She ends up with a 6-hit arts card. It does not feel very good to use, unfortunately, most of the time, due to how low the NP gain rate is set. So again, it is balanced for her, and I do think they intended for you to be able to do a lot of triple arts comps in order to be able to like help her get her charge enough. But over the years, she has gotten some upgrades to really help her out. So you can see they ended up upgrading her first skill. It's still the party-wide charge of 10% every turn for 3 turns. It's really nice for not only getting Abby to her NP, but also helping out the supports and other units get there. It's also going to increase the party's NP damage for 3 turns by 30%, and now will also charge Abby's own gauge by 30%. Unfortunately, it is on a 7-turn cooldown, so no dice for you guys trying to double Koyanskya her, unless you do some sort of cooldown operation to help that out. Second skill here is just her mass hysteria. It's her terror in effect. It's going to allow her to basically have a chance to activate stun on people while also reducing their defense. As you level the skill, the stun chance goes higher. At 50%, I do think it could be a little bit stronger at this point, but hey, it is what it is, and I do think this is still a very solid skill at helping lock down enemies over time, especially since it might trigger on different enemies on different turns if you're going up against multiple. Her third skill here is a drain to the enemy, basically draining their gauge by 1 and also reducing their attack by 20%. This is just going to make them card you less hard and also help stall them out. So again, not a bad unit in that regard. It does get some really nice passes, including the EX version of existence outside the domain. And you can see that her NP is a single target buster NP that removes one enemy's buffs activating first. So basically just a really nice effect where she is going to just carve up the enemy. You're not going to stop her from damaging you unless you just have some sort of unremovable buff due to the fact that it's a challenge quest. But other than that, you can definitely see that Abby is going to be really solid in terms of dealing damage and also reducing the critical attack chance. Her damage numbers in and of themselves are not that bad, though we certainly have seen, a lot of power creep with regards to the foreigner class, and I could definitely say she is not necessarily the top at this point anymore. But certainly it is still very solid as far as how it works, and given the fact that she has the ability to buff her move against an enemy and just sort of help debilitate them and get the party going, that is one of the reasons that Abby has always been a good and usable unit, even in the face of units like Hokusai, where they were coming out shortly after her, and for periods of time we actually had people yelling, "Don't get Abby, get Hokusai." In reality, at that time, Abby actually ended up being a little bit of the better unit to have in the interim, but, certainly over time, Hokusai has managed to come into her own and been a lot more of a loopable unit, so I don't think Hokusai is bad either, but a lot of people were doing Abby a disservice by saying don't get her. She is still a very good unit to this day. Next up here, we have Demia. Demia is a very perplexing 4-star to me. Earlier we talked about Geronimo and how Geronimo has one of the most boring kits in the entire game, even though he's actually not that bad of a unit. That pretty much applies to Demia as well. Demia has one of the most uninspired kits that you will ever see. He does have a decent attack stat here. It's not quite 9k, but it's not that far off, so it's decent for a 4-star. And sort of how they've begun to treat Demia over time is he is the top dog as far as single target archers go. This is actually one of the main issues with the single target archer category, is the fact that Demia is considered to be the top damage dealer, because he shouldn't be at this point. We basically should have SSRs out damaging him, but the fact that they don't is one of the issues at play. Again, he does only have the double arts deck as a single target arts NP. I'm sure a lot of people would wish that this were instead triple arts, but I do think the devs wanted to temper him, especially with his ability to refund after an MP. Again, he only has a 0.43 NP gain rate, and that does matter for him. Again, right off the bat here, you can see with his kit, he's got defense up of 3 attacks, 5 turns, and reduced damage taken for 3 attacks. The defense up is strong. The damage taken is just a decent amount, but at the end of the day, it's just a solid defensive skill for him. His second skill was a quick arts and buster tricolor buff of 30% up for 1 turn. Thankfully, they decided to upgrade this, basically make it 3 attacks, 3 turns, so that it didn't all have to be used at once. And it's also now a 30% charge, all on a 5-turn cooldown. In that regard, this cooldown being only at 5 is kind of nuts. It means he gets a lot of uptime on this skill, but certainly I understand them transitioning this out of a 1-turn buff into a multi-turn duration buff, so that you just get more capability to card with him. His third skill here is basically just an attack up of 3 attacks, 5 turns of 40%. This is a shitty limitation on him, and it basically means you're going to want to pop this actually when you plan to NP, not earlier, because you'll probably end up using it on carding otherwise. So it is what it is, but this is kind of the issue with Demia's kit. It is just very straightforward. He's got defense, he's got attack up, and he's got, card buff. That's it. Once you get to his NP, you can see why they wanted to keep him in check a little bit. He is a 10-hit single-target arts NP. He deals damage that ignores defense buffs to one enemy. It has had its interlude, though, so they did increase the amount of damage it does, and they basically changed him from having a chance to reduce the NP gauge of 60% to now just 80%. This actually brings him in a little bit ahead of Squirtoria, who only has a 70% chance to drain. Unfortunately for Demia, he is not nearly as loopable as she is, and he definitely requires his cards to be able to loop all the time. So that's kind of one of the issues that he ends up having. Realistically, that is why they kept his NP gain rate low, is because the hit counts on his NP are so high. So it is what it is. I do think Demia is still a really solid unit at this point in time, but being the most solid single target archer in terms of damage output is not that good of a medal to win at this point in time in the game, because honestly most people actually that compete with the archers out damage them. So again, it is what it is. I do think Demia is an interesting unit. He is story locked, he's difficult to get your hands on, he doesn't get a lot of good solo rate up banners, so it's up to you if you want to decide to try and roll. Next up here we have Penth. We actually haven't had the chance to talk about her yet. Penth, honestly, the biggest issue with Penth is that she's going to struggle with survival. She only has 10k attack, and she really doesn't have any sort of hard survival in her kit Stay Alive. She is the epitome of a glass cannon, though. She has over 10k attack as a 4-star, and she ends up basically having a triple buster deck here to really help her pop off. Her first skill is just a straightforward increase to the party-wide charisma of 18% there for 3 turns. Her second skill is a debuff immunity for 3 turns, which is basically her survival skill. Again, it's going to stop her from getting debilitated, but it is not going to keep her alive in the face of her getting punched. So from there, though, it's also going to charge her own gauge every turn for 3 turns by 20%. This does have some unique applications, as it can basically allow her to be able to, charge up over time and handle a single enemy wave for someone. So I do find it to be somewhat useful in that capacity, particularly in a scenario in which she may be able to card in a prior wave in order to help the party get stuff down. Her third skill here is an increase to the party's buster performance of 3 turns by 20%, which also sort of helps her out in that scenario where she might want to take out a single enemy wave, but help out the party. She's got attack up, she's got buster up for the party, really nice there. But then in addition, she also increases her own damage against any Greek mythology male. So this is a male from the Greek mythology sort of pantheon there. For 3 turns, and it is a 100% power mod. Against Greek mythology males, Penth is basically unmatched. She will absolutely slaughter them. This is a really insanely powerful power mod. You definitely want to be careful if you were ever taking a Greek male up against her. But again, this could be really good for you as the player. If you can manage to get her to her NP, she's absolutely going to decimate people. You just have to be careful with break bars and stuff in play now. But the skill is on a 5-turn cooldown, so relatively fast to get back due to its uptime. With regards to everything else here, her Noble Phantasm is a single target 8-hit NP. It deals damage to one enemy and then reduces their attack for 3 turns by 10%. So I do find Penth to be never the most meta unit by any means, but she's always been a fun unit to use. She's the epitome of a unit you do not have to have, but she has some really nice niche uses at certain times, and I really do enjoy getting to haul her out and just have her just absolutely beat the crap out of someone. From there, we've already talked about Yagyu, so next up is going to be Kato Danzo, another one of our story-locked units. I'm of the opinion that Kato Danzo is honestly not in the best shape at this point in time. I think she is an interesting unit that honestly, for one, deserves a little bit more story time, and two, she actually needs to be somewhat buffed in terms of her kit. She's not the worst unit by any means, but I do feel like with the way the current meta has evolved over time in FGO that she could really end up using some love. Why do I say that? Well, she does have a double buster, double quick deck, and that is actually going to be to her benefit since her first skill increases them both for 3 turns by 30%. It's all on a 5-turn cooldown, so it's relatively low. Her second skill is a targetable 1-turn evasion, so she can put this on herself or someone else. That's also going to increase their critical star gen rate by 45. Her third skill here is an increase to one ally's invincibility for 1 turn, and then basically an increase to their star generation rate for 1 turn by 45 as well. She has 2 targetable hard survival skills, but she doesn't end up having basically any sort of capacity to help her get to her NP. That's always kind of been her biggest issue, because Kato Danzo for a long time honestly hasn't had the highest damaging NP anyways. So realistically, the only reason a lot of people used her is sort of as this niche survival unit to maybe come in and help the party. That being said, she has had her NP interlude at this point in time. It is a 3-hit AoE NP that deals damage to all enemies, increases the party's buster performance by 20% for 3 turns now. Unfortunately, it's after the NP, not before, so there's that, but it still is meant to help other people out. Thankfully, she does have the overcharge effect that will deal super effective damage to demonic enemies, so she does have that as her niche use. But yes, at this point in time in the game, I do feel like Kato Danzo could use something like a 30% charge skill, and that would really help out her overall usability. So again, I don't really recommend rolling for her devotedly unless you just really like the character or you're trying to collect another story locked unit. But otherwise, I do think she could be good if the devs manage to actually give her some love. Next up here, we end up with Cersei. Cersei is a very solid single target option for a lot of people. In fact, you know, she ends up being a lot of people's go-to option if they've kind of graduated on from Medea. That is to say, they maybe haven't landed one of the sort of rare SSR single target casters, but they've managed to get spooked by Cersei due to her permanent nature. Again, she's single target buster with regards to her being a caster there. Her attack stat is not all too great, but it's not terrible either. And she does have a triple arts deck, even though she has the buster NP. Her first skill here does not need to be leveled to 10, thank God, but it is a over 100% charge skill. Her second skill inflicts poison for 3 turns to all enemies, and then further reduces their defense by 20% for 3 turns. And then her third skill here is a cleanse for the entire party with critical star generation buff for 3 turns of up to 50%. This is actually one of the really nice uses of Cersei as well from time to time, is that she can come in, nuke something for you while also cleansing the entire party of negative status effects. Can be useful to you in something like a raid, like the Barbados raid that you guys saw, and also potentially in other scenarios where you just maybe have a debuff getting rolled out right at the beginning of battle. So again, Cersei has a really nice kit. You can see her Noble Phantasm has had its interlude. It is a single target buster NP of 5 hits. It deals damage to one enemy and then has a sort of unique stun effect that it will place on enemies where it turns them into a pig. Pigify is actually really interesting because it applies almost specifically when you never expect it to. That is to say, it will work on units that it absolutely should, it will work on units that it absolutely shouldn't, and it won't work on units that it should. Just is what it is. It's a very confusing skill. It's difficult to determine who has immunity to it and who doesn't, and it often ends up being a case of, if you're going to use Cersei, maybe go check ahead of time. Still, it is what it is. And she can also, from there, remove their offensive buffs after the damage goes out. Her overcharge effect is just a simple, sort of straightforward 10% reduction to their critical attack chance for 3 turns. So I do think that Cersei's damage, you know, in some degrees it could be better, but this is just sort of the issue that we run into with single target casters. Again, at the end of the day, I highly recommend checking her out if you don't have any other option, and she can be a very good single target caster for you. Last but not least amongst the 4 stars here is Queen of Sheba. She is also a single target caster, and she is story locked. She also doesn't get a lot of banners. In fact, I believe someone was commenting earlier that this is actually one of her first banners in a long time. So Caster of Midrash, as she is otherwise known, basically ends up having another decent attack stat. She's got double Buster, double Arts deck, and that is also to her benefit, as you will see here shortly. Her first skill has had its upgrade. It used to just increase the party's attack basically by 17.8%. Now it's up to 20% for 3 turns, and it's also a self-charge of 30%. Something that basically Midrash desperately needed, as Midrash was one of the only single target casters in the entire game that didn't have charge in her kit. I believe now at this point in time, the only one that still doesn't is the Welfare Shootin' Caster, but still, it is a rough road to hoe if you were one of those units. So thankfully, they ended up coming back in and giving that to her. And you can see here from the second skill that she now also has 100% crit damage for 1 turn, as well as Ignore Invincibility. So really not too bad of a kit. The only issue is that she is arts, and so getting the stars on her is somewhat concerning. That being said, she increases the party's arts and buster performance for 3 turns by 20% each, so a little bit of extra utility for her, and then a 10 crit star bomb. This is nice, but this definitely could stand to be even more, and she doesn't also have any sort of capability in her kit to soak things. Given the fact that she is a caster, that is a concern, because obviously you're going to want to have the unit that has 100% crit damage probably soak the stars. Still, you can see her NP is a single target arts NP. It basically deals damage to 1 enemy, and then as an overcharge, reduces their defense, attack, and healing received for 3 turns each by 10, 10, and then 30% for the last effect there, the heal rate. So, I do think Midrash is a lot more usable now that she has the charge skill upgrade, but I do think she could certainly use a little bit more love. We'll see how that pans out in the future, but I still think a lot of people are going to roll for her just because they really like her design, or they essentially find that she is another story-locked unit to collect. Last one on this entire banner for this entire segment is Hosuin Inshin. We actually went over Ken Liang Yu earlier, and Hosuin is sort of the closest analog to her. However, I feel like, interestingly enough, as a 3-star, he kind of does it better. That is to say, he knows what his niche is, and he fulfills it. Again, his attack stat is nothing to be desired really at only 6.7k, but he does have a NP charge rate of 1.06. His quick cards, he managed to have a triple quick deck. He manages to have 3 hits on that, so you're really going to want to go with the quick cards when possible on him, but you may need to use the arts card for more NP gain or the buster card to get him more damage from time to time. His first skill here is an Ignore Evasion, basically for 3 turns. Definitely nice to have at least multiple turn duration on that. And a critical star regeneration buff of 3 turns of 30%. The second skill here increases his own quick performance for 1 turn of 50%. This is really nice, but you're going to want the stars to align. You're going to want all the quick cards to show up here so you can get that triple quick chain, or at least double quick cards to help that out. Again, this is sort of the issue with it. While it is strong, it is only the 1 turn duration. It's also going to increase his own mental debuff resistance, sort of preventing things like charm and terror from applying. His third skill here ends up sealing the enemy's NP for 1 turn and reducing their defense for 3 turns by 20%. So you can see it's just a nice kit for kind of allowing him to pop off and enable his damage. His Noble Phantasm is a arts support NP. It increases his own attack for 3 turns, basically up to 50%, assuming you have NP 5, as you should. He will increase his own critical damage by 100% for 3 turns as well, so really strong there, and grant himself instant kill immunity for 1 turn on top of that. Here he will also grant himself evasion for 1 time, so this does give him a little bit of a hard survival skill on command for being able to outlive an NP, but it's certainly not the most robust effect. Still, again, he doesn't have a whole lot in terms of sustain, but he definitely has it in terms of offense, and that's where I say he just kind of knows what he is and does it well. His overcharge, as the last aspect here, increases his own critical star regeneration rate by 100% for 3 turns, so certainly getting to his NP and using that to set up his second skill and all of his quick cards, really beneficial to Hosuin. And again, you guys could see the actual timing of the banners here. You're going to end up basically with some interesting pairings, as you're going to have Moriarty with Demia, you're going to have Shez with Penth, and you're going to end up having Musashi with basically the entire Shimosa Epic of Remnant cast, and then basically Abby with the entire Salem Epic of Remnant cast. So realistically, very straightforward banner. It just took me a long time to get through it. So again, I do think the Singularity Repair Support campaign can be decent banners for you guys depending on what your goals are in FGO, how new you are to the game, you name it. But it's not something you should just immediately write off, and it can provide you with a decent way to get certain rarer units on a single raid up. From there, we just had the Advanced Quest Part 10, so that is pretty much going to wrap up all of November. Now, in November here, we end up with the pre-release campaign for the Fairy Night Cup. The big thing to understand about the Fairy Night Cup is, again, it is you're basically going to be your Christmas Lotto, but it is a fest event in terms of its structure instead of a Christmas event in terms of its structure. What does that mean? That means you get a 90 plus and plus plus node right off the very bat day one. So you don't have to worry too much about there being a good node for you to farm. It's not like the Christmas events of old where you had to go through all the low level nodes in subsequent days until you worked your way up. So really, really nice for this one to be the case. Again, the pre-campaign here just gave out some apples and basically some foes as well if you managed to do any things, but there was no actual banner here. Oh, sorry, there was a banner here. This was Morgan Le Fay's banner. Yeah, that's right. This is basically her 4th banner within 2 years. It was at this point that a lot of people began to criticize how many banners she had gotten. But the reality was she actually had not gotten them in nearly as fast of a rate as Taigong Wang had. Still, you can see you did get some other campaigns here to add all daily quest rotations available and basically servant strengthening quests and all interlude campaigns being half cost. So really, really nice in that regard. The banner here, we've already talked about Morgan, so I'm not going to spend any time on this, but it does have Valentine Witches as the sole rate up CE. And this is a very good CE if you manage to actually need it. It is all attack scaling, increases basically your ability to ignore invincibility, and then also gives NP damage and NP gain rate by a significant amount. So this is a really good CE over time. For a lot of people, it's not going to end up outplaying something like Honey Lake, but maybe you don't have access to Honey Lake anymore. This is going to be a good substitute, or maybe you just need something that's meant to, help you get to that NP a little bit faster down the stretch. So really, really nice in that regard. Again, Valentine's Witch is a very solid option for a CE. That's going to be it for the pre-campaign, and then we go into the actual Fairy Night Cup. Oh boy, am I going to have a lot to say about this one. So there is no welfare in this or anything like that. We just have three different summoning campaigns basically, and each one is an interesting unit. All right, so first up here, we actually end up having Britomart. Britomart, a lot of people are going to compare her to Bradamante as she is very similar. They're both AoE quick lancers. I do find that Britomart to me is a interesting unit. I think she's a very solid unit, and I think it's actually due to Britomart that you end up seeing some love kind of given the way of Bradamante. That being said, I think a lot of people, obviously people liked her design when she came out, but I think a lot of people also sort of panned her, and that's just due to the close proximity of the release of Melisande being fresh in everyone's mind, with her releasing in the prior year. A lot of people are still caught up on that as far as AoE Lancers go, and a lot of people will compare every single AoE Lancer that comes out to Melisande. So as a result, Britomart doesn't really necessarily get a fair shake, but she is certainly a solid option for you should you desire her. And again, you can see her NP is actually, the stages of her ascensions are actually very interesting, as she kind of starts out in a full-blown suit and then ends up sort of transforming into more of this like fairy princess type of aesthetic. She does have a double buster, double quick deck, which is definitely really good in comparing with double Scotty there, particularly Summer Scotty. And you can see that she will grant herself invincibility for 2 attacks, 3 turns. She increases her own NP gen rate for 3 turns by 30%, which is really nice for a lot of our quick units, and increases her own critical attack chance resistance for 3 turns for a little bit of extra survivability there. She will gain 10 crit stars here on the use of the second skill, also gain crit stars every single turn for 3 turns up to 10, and then grant herself debuff immunity and increase her critical damage by 30%. So really pretty solid there in terms of the way that second skill works as well. The third skill here, though, is going to be the breadwinner in terms of damage and charge, as it's going to give her quick and buster up for 3 turns of 30% each, and then also charging her NP gauge by an additional 30% effect there. So really solid for her to have this, and again, it's what's going to enable her to actually be able to loop. From here, you can see that her NP is actually a 6-hit AoE NP. It has Invuln Pierce that activates first and then increases her own damage against anybody that has Riding. Interestingly enough, if this were a archer against sabers, this would be really useful, but as a lancer against archers, this is decidedly less useful. That being said, there are still plenty of units out there that may be neutral or maybe even something like a berserker that would be effective. So certainly this is still a decent niche to have, and you can see as basically it's going to increase her damage by 50% for one turn, making it a power mod that will impact also the cards after her NP. She's then going to deal damage to all enemies, and then her overcharge effect will deal extra damage to enemies that are a rider. That is to say, anything that is a rider, she will gain super effective damage against. Really, really nice, considering a lot of rider enemies should have the riding power mod. So in a weird way, you have Bradamante being effective against obviously archers, but potentially riders as well. It's an interesting take on a unit to make them effective pretty much against two different classes, and I do think that's going to allow for some niche uses for Britomart. She's the epitome of a not gotta have type of unit, but if you really like her, you can absolutely go for her, and I think you'll see a lot of people do like her design, regardless of the way that her kit actually manages to work. She is a loopable unit. I believe she even can Black Grail loop if memory serves me correctly, so she's not a bad unit by any stretch of the imagination. But again, everybody is going to end up getting compared in that class to Melisande until they start getting some actual NP interludes and buffs to help them out. We've already talked about Barghest and Balbon Sis, so we don't need to mention them at this point in time, but we can talk about Apex, which is a very solid gacha CE right here. The 5-star CE is all attack scaling, and it basically gives 50% charge, 10% buster up, and an overcharge by 2 stages for 1 time. So again, a really solid option if you need that combination of effects, particularly the starting charge, as it could allow a unit to really pop off at least the 1 time. It just depends on whether or not you're going to need something hard like this, but this is a really solid CE should the conditions be right. Road to Star is also not bad, simply because it is one of those rare 4-star star bomb types of CEs. So not the most in terms of stars even at MLB, but hey, it is what it is. If you just need stars on a budget, it is an option. And honestly, Muscle Bullet there is actually not a bad one either for a 3-star. Your summoning campaign number 2 is Charlemagne and Bradamante and Roland. I have already covered all of the units on this banner, so there is no need to go over them, and it is the same CEs again. So next up here we have Summoning Banner 3. Oh, actually, just real quick as an aside, this banner in particular actually resulted in one of the worst nodes that FGO has ever seen. That is to say, the banner that you see at play is the node that people had to go up against, a double saber and lancer node, again with a unit like Charlemagne that has star attribute, making a lot of people really annoyed when they tried to use their archers up against this, since Bradamante was there as a counter unit. It is what it is. It was a dick move by the devs, but that is the story about how this banner came to be. It was because of that node. Lastly, we have the summoning campaign number 3. We have actually already covered Brynhildr, Sigurd, Siegfried, and Kriemhild already to this point. So all that remains is Kintonki and Heracles, so we're going to end up covering each of them. Again, Kintonki is still a really solid unit at this point in time in the game. When he first came out, he was really good, but then break bars started to be a thing, and it really began to cramp his style. Still, he's ended up now getting some nice upgrades over time that have allowed him to just still be a really solid option, and charge has come back into play alongside the buster meta, really helping him out. So he's got a gorilla deck here with triple buster outcomes. and really pretty nice in that regard for his carding power. He gets 1 turn of attack up by 50% on a low cooldown. Definitely a strong skill, but I'm sure a lot of people would prefer if this were multi-turn duration. His second skill is a 50% charge skill on a low cooldown. Again, it is 6 turns, so you could potentially double this skill up, allowing him to be utilized in a double Koyanskya setup should you so choose. And considering his first skill is a 5-turn cooldown, you could pop that skill on a turn 2 and a turn 3 type of setup. So you do have some leeway with how you choose to use him. And again, his third skill here is sort of his survival skill. It's just a self-heal of up to 3,000 with the ability to increase his own offensive debuff resistance, making it harder to put a stop to him. Again, though, his biggest issue is he has no hard survival anywhere in his kit, so he is rather squishy. So just make sure you don't give enemies the chance to actually hit him too much, and you should be fine. His NP is a single hit, single target Buster NP. It deals damage that ignores defense buffs to one enemy. It has had its interlude. They increased the amount of damage and then also added the ability to reduce the Buster resist by 30% for 2 turns after the damage goes out. From here, he also has a 50% chance to stun the enemy for 1 turn, which can have its interesting uses if you manage to pull this off in a boss fight. And certainly I think you'll see that Kintonki is a unit now with his NP interlude that just hits amazingly hard. He is absolutely an easy bar break for most scenarios, and he can be somebody that might be able to handle multiple as long as you actually manage to support him well. So I do think Kintonki has basically gotten the upgrades that he's needed to stay viable, and he is still a really solid option for you. Last but not least, we have Mr. Heracles here, aka Hercules. Herc is a unit that is talked about a lot in FGO. He is that unit that basically a lot of people will tell you should start the game with. I am of a different opinion. I actually don't believe you should start the game with Herc. And the reason for this is because it's actually somewhat difficult to get a Herc online to his full capacity. Usually the reason a lot of people will suggest him is because they know what he can turn into down the stretch. He is quite the monster in terms of challenge content and survivability. He's what we refer to as a cockroach. That is to say, he is very difficult to kill. And given his triple buster deck, the fact that he is a berserker makes him very good at just pumping out damage in return. So Herc is a solid option, but why should you maybe not start the game with him? The reason for this has mostly just due to the fact that he is a unit that you really need bond 10 with him in order to allow him to reach his maximum potential. That is to say, his bond CE is a major part of what makes him so strong in those scenarios that I just described. You can absolutely use him without it, but it's not going to be the best of situations for you, as basically his survivability without it can be somewhat a problem. So just kind of going through the kit right here, you can see he has over 10k attack, really solid in that regard. The triple buster deck for him to be able to hit really hard. And again, his first skill here is going to be an increase to his own attack for 3 turns by up to 31%. He increases his own mental debuff resistance for 3 turns as well by up to 42%, so rather odd numbers on that skill, but unlikely for it to get a buff at any point. The second skill here is just a 1-turn hard evasion. This is very nice, but the problem, as you can see, is that berserkers are squishy. So outside of the 1-turn duration of this skill, how are you going to stop people from dealing damage to her? We'll talk about that in a second here, but this is also going to increase his crit damage for 3 turns up to 36%. His third skill started out as just battle continuation, a guts for 1 time over 5 turns with a decent amount of HP on it. Unfortunately, it had a 7-turn cooldown, so it was somewhat difficult to actually be able to kind of get a whole lot of usefulness out of this. This absolutely would prevent him from dying, but once your guts was gone, you had a hard time. You really needed to, in a lot of circumstances, use the evasion early and then try to basically get the guts pop and then get back to the evasion to keep him alive. And if Herc was just getting wailed on or you just got bad RNG, there was not a lot you could do to stop that. From here, though, the devs realized that he could use some love, and they gave him an upgrade called Indomitable. This basically just changes it so that his guts can now stack with other sources of guts, which is really nice because that was one of the issues that it had, is that it did not stack with his craft essence for bonding. So again, you can see now though, when his guts will proc, basically whenever it is popped, it will also grant him a buff for 5 turns that increases his own Buster performance by 20% whenever a guts is activated. This is really nice with the addition of his Bond CE because he will get multiple guts from that, and each one of them can trigger this 20% Buster up, allowing him to become quite the nightmare should he get closer and closer to death. So again, really a solid upgrade for him. You can see he does have Madness Enhancement B as well for some additional Buster up there. And his Noble Phantasm is a 15-hit single target Buster in P that deals damage to one enemy. It will also further reduce their defense for 3 turns by 10%. Nothing too amazing as far as an effect goes, but hey, it's just icing on the cake at that point if you get him to his NP and you manage to keep triple bustering after the fact. Again, just as a quick sort of sneak peek here, you can see his Bond CE here, his Castle of Snow. Whenever it's equipped on him, it grants him Gut status for 3 times, reviving at 5,000 or 500 HP. Whenever a Guts gets triggered, if the unit is the only unit on the field, it means that the enemies will just stop attacking and end their turn. This could actually be really useful for Herc, and it's why a lot of people use him to solo. Herc is an amazingly powerful unit if you use him and set him up right, but he definitely requires investment and definitely requires some time in order to get him working. So you can see the overall banner pairings here with Bren with Kriemhild, Sigurd with Sumanai, and Kintonki with Herc. Definitely really solid. Unfortunately, they did end up pairing basically these single target berserkers with each other, but certainly both are really usable and useful. Again, the same sort of CEs here, so nothing too much we have to talk about with regards to this. Just a bit of a sneak peek at what the lottery will give you guys in this one. You can see some really nice sort of materials to look forward to. So up to you guys to determine how you want to handle the lotto for this one, but it is certainly going to be your first lotto in basically 8 months since Tesla Fest at that point. So a lot of you will probably want to go quite hard in it. So that is the Fairy Knight Cup. Then we have the Lost Belt 7 pre-release support campaign. Again, this is just pretty much trying to get everyone prepped. You can see they do end up having a summoning campaign for Artoria Caster and Da Vinci Rider. So I actually have already covered both of these units, so there's no need to cover them again. Again, Castoria, I believe, was at the 25 million downloads campaign, and Leonardo da Vinci was during the Learning with Manga pre-campaign for that. From here, you guys can see, though, there are some decent CEs, including Walk in the Park and Celebrate Memories. Both of these CEs are a starting charge of 60%. It is split stats here on Walk in the Park. It gives NP damage up of 15% and critical star absorption of 200%. It's not a bad CE, just probably not worth you leveling it up. Celebrate Memories is also 60%, also split stats. This one is quick and buster up of 10% each. Really wish this one were all attack. It would be an absolutely phenomenal C if it was, but as a result, still, again, you probably don't want to waste the time actually leveling it. And that's pretty much all there is to talk about with regards to this one and this campaign. You do get some returnee rewards for those of you guys that have quit playing at any point in time, but it's pretty, again, straightforward as far as banners go. Then we round out November with Advanced Quest Part 11, and now we have finally made it to the final month of the year, December. So here we have the Road to Lost Belt 6 campaign, or sorry, Road to Lost Belt 7, number 6 campaign is basically Lost Belt 6. Again, you can see you got some interludes that unlocked, so just like we talked about before, even if you don't have the unit, you should be able to do some of the interludes for these. You got Recollection quests in here, one of which is definitely a difficult one, but it is what it is. Then we get the return of some very desired units. So first up here is going to be Mr. Muramasa. Now, Muramasa is another unit that I think is still to this day just incredibly strong with his kit. He does a whole ton of sort of effects and capabilities. He is a very difficult unit to stop, and that makes him good in challenge scenarios, but he's also a really good farmer because he can be a Black Grail arts looper. So again, he does come in here with only 11k attack, but that's nothing too much to worry about. In fact, I will point out that the one weakness, if you could say that he has any, that Muramasa has, is actually his damage output. That is to say, when compared to other Black Grail loopers, they may outdamage Muramasa. That does not mean that Muramasa is a bad unit, though, by any stretch of the imagination. He still ends up having really robust HP, though, to trade off. He's got double arts, double buster in terms of his deck, and you will see just how strong this kit is. Basically, he increases his quick arts and buster performance for 1 turn each by 50%. He will also increase his critical star absorption for 1 turn by 100%. Absolutely fantastic for a Saber to have this amount. And he will gain critical stars up to 15 here on a 5-turn cooldown. His second skill here will grant him Invuln Pierce, making it so that you are not going to stop him. It's also going to increase his own critical damage against enemies that have evasion or invuln for 1 turn, further punishing any enemy that would try to stop him, basically giving him 100% crit damage up in that scenario. He will also increase his critical star generation rate for 3 turns by 100%, and as if that were not enough crit damage, even though it was conditional, we're just going to give him 100% crit damage up for 3 turns. So the man can have 100% at minimum and up to 200% in a crazy scenario that the enemy decided to try and dare stay alive. His third skill here will basically charge his own NP gauge by 50% and also grants himself the Blaze buff for 3 turns that will charge his NP gauge whenever he normal attacks. This is pretty similar to the effect that you get on Koyanskya's middle skill, except instead of it being specific to Buster, this is just all of Muramasa's attacks. So really nice. The only thing it's not going to impact is his actual NP. Still, 10% charge there is very, very solid and makes it easily able for him to card back to an NP should he so choose. His passive effects here are just fantastic, particularly the unique one that he has that is a power mod against sovereign enemies by 20%. He just straight up gets 20% more damage all the time to anybody that has a king trait. His Nimble Phantasm is AoE arts at only 3 hits. So again, a little bit of an NP gen issue there, but due to the 50% charge in his kit, I don't think you'll find it to be that much of a problem. His NP first increases NP damage by 10% for 3 turns. So again, this will stack and get stronger as he continues to loop, and that does mean that Oberon can also enhance it. He will remove enemies' offensive buffs just in case you dare wanted to try and kill him first rather than outlast him. He will then deal damage that ignores defense buffs to them. So yeah, you also can't just try to mitigate him. Even if you tried to pop an actual survival skill, Muramasa does not care. He has no feelings towards you. His overcharge effect also increases his arts performance for 3 turns by 10%, activating first. So again, another aspect of his MP where he just gets stronger within a 3-turn loop. So again, you can see Muramasa just absolutely has a disgustingly good kit. It is one of the just most absolutely overstuffed power creep kits in the entire game. Muramasa is the epitome of a laundry list in terms of his skills, and somebody that the devs are going to have a hard time actually trying to make units better without just making them flat out outdamage him because of how much he can do. So again, no matter how much Muramasa is ever outdamaged, rest assured Muramasa is still a good unit to roll because of how useful he can be. Next up here, we end up having Melisson. And Melisson is, again, another really strong, really power creepy unit. Like I've been saying throughout the entire course of these videos, this is exactly the unit that pretty much all other AoE Lancers are compared to at this point. It's so much so that I've actually at certain points gone off on basically the devs for kind of how strong they made her. The issue at play here is that Melisson is so strong that they basically overtuned her to the point that she is actually wasteful. I'm going to make a point on that as we go through, but again, just stay tuned and you'll understand what I mean. It does not mean she is a bad unit. In fact, she is basically the gold standard at this point for what AoE Lancers should be. So, as we start to look at the laundry list of traits that she has there, we're just going to instead focus on the fact she is double buster, double arts. So she does have that synergy no matter what her NP type is, because that is the big thing with Mel. She can change her NP type and thus the card type of her NP as well by comparison. So she does have 12k attack, which is just a stellar attack stat. And again, you can see her first skill here increases her own attack for 3 turns by 40%. Will also reduce her damage taken by 500 for 3 turns. It will increase her own max HP for 3 turns as if she needed a heal, as if anyone was going to actually touch her, basically by 2000. And then will also charge her gauge by 30% on a 6-turn cooldown. Due to the fact this is on a 6-turn cooldown, this means you can double the skill up, use it on turns 1 and 3 within a 3-turn. In fact, there is a reason to actually really want to lure this skill, because basically if you manage to unlock her mana loading and utilize this skill, you actually have the capability of starting Mel from a 50% C instead of a Black Grail, and this is actually going to free up how you use the 3rd skill. I'll make the point when we get to it over there, but understand that this may actually be more beneficial than trying to start her from 0 in scenarios like events where you're forced to take an event CE. Her second skill here increases her own critical star absorption for 3 turns by 5,000%. This is absolutely incredibly overkill. This is the amount of star absorption that Berserkers and Avengers need, not a Lancer that has 90 star absorption. The amount of star absorption Mel would have probably actually needed would have instead been about somewhere around the 1,000 to 2,000 range at most. So 5,000 is the epitome of overkill. Her star gen basically is 10 stars per turn for 3 turns, and she will also have a crit star bomb here of 1,000%. The whole reason that this is set to 5,000 actually has to do with Lancelot, her sort of contemporary, because again, he ends up having a really strong star absorption on his as well. Her third skill here, basically Ray Horizon, is how you're going to switch her NP. Melisande starts out as a single target arts NP in her first and second stages. Melisande can be transitioned into her third ascension, which will change her NP to AoE Buster. This is why that thing that I talked about with that first skill matters, and you'll see here in a second. So basically, if you utilize it in stages 1 and 2, it will transform her into stage 3, changing her to AoE Buster, charging her gauge by 100%, and granting herself invincibility for 1 turn. So again, really, really strong in terms of its capability. Once you're in stage 3, it will basically increase her NP damage for 3 turns by 30% and grant her still the 1 turn of invincibility. Thus, the logic kind of goes that if you manage to actually lure this skill here, manage to lure the mana loading, and start her with a 50% CE, she can handle that right there. You can take double buffs from basically Koyanskya's, have that work basically for that, and then basically get her 30% charge skill back by turn 3 and combine that with an Oberon. This allows her to start out and basically double pop this third skill, gaining you extra NP damage, as you would be able to utilize this on turns 1 and 2, essentially skipping over the need to actually utilize her 100% charge. But again, that's a niche scenario, and for the majority of people, I think you'll find starting her out basically with an MLB Black Grail is going to be your go-to. You're going to start her out in stages 1 to 2, and then instead pop this skill, get her 100% charge, and then basically use double Koyanskya, bringing her up to full for the second wave there, and then basically Oberon plus her first skill here in order to enable that. So again, there's a lot of ways that you can use her, but the important thing to denote in all of this is that Melisande actually doesn't need all 100% of this charge. That is to say, you could have still forced Melisande to be able to 3-turn from 0% charge if this charge skill were set at only 50%. So yet another extremely wasteful aspect of Melisande's kit. She absolutely does not need this in order for her to succeed and be able to 3-turn from 0. She has 50% more charge than she actually needs. Is what it is. Basically, we get to her Noble Phantasm again. In her single target form, it is single target arts. It is a 5-hit MP. It deals damage to 1 enemy. It's not the best damage amongst single target Lancers, but it doesn't need to be because it's still pretty decent. It increases their damage taken by 1,000 for 5 turns, very similar to Saber Lancelot's NP, and gains her 10 crit stars as if she needed more. Her overcharge effect increases her NP gen rate by 3 turns, activating first by 20%. This means that it will stack as you continue to loop with her single target form, making it easier for her to subsequently loop turn after turn. It's actually a really powerful effect if you manage to do this, and this is why, as long as you have Melisande, you basically at this point don't need any other AoE Lancer or even a single target Lancer potentially. This is a really weird situation that I think the devs have found themselves in, and they are going to eventually have to buff the Lancers if they want anyone to roll for anything other than Mel. Still, at the end of the day, this is pretty good, but it is not going to result in her dealing the most damage out of all the Lancers. Her third stage, though, as we've mentioned, is AoE Buster. This is a stage that most people actually will use her in the majority of the time just because of how much damage they can amp. It's got Invuln Pierce as if she needed yet another really strong effect, so again, you're not going to stop Mel. It deals damage to all enemies, inflicts burn to them, so yes, you could even use her with something like Honey Lake if you wanted, though the Invuln Pierce would be redundant on her. She will also then increase her own Buster performance for 3 turns, activating first by 20%, so you are going to have the ability to keep stacking this, making her stronger in a 3-turn loop, and having her just be able to really pop off. So again, Melisande is absolutely a cracked unit at this point in time, and there are going to be a lot of people that are going to be rolling for her since this is her return. You will see that she is a unit that has held up really well, but it's mostly just due to the fact of, again, they have not really actually managed to buff anybody alongside to actually compete with her, and they're going to have to do a lot in order to make anyone in the Lancer category that competition. Oberon is your next unit up, and well, I can safely say that if you didn't roll for Oberon 18 months ago by the time you get to this banner, you're going to want to roll for Oberon here. So I highly recommend saving. Oberon is just sort of the premier power creep unit in the game at this point. He represents a monumental shift in damage output. He is a support that I believe everybody should try to get their hands on, whether or not you actually feel like you need him. The reason for this is just due to the actual health bloat that's going on in the game. We've seen the devs actually put in 90++ nodes in response to him, and it's certainly the reason that they kept him gone for 18 months, because I think they feared the amount of damage scalability that Oberon enabled. I'm not sure whether or not the devs actually realized this ahead of time or it was a reactionary gesture, but at the end of the day, Oberon is absolutely a unit to get the most bang for your buck out of your account. As long as you're not talking about 90++ nodes, Oberon is a unit that enables you to actually be able to, do just about everything with NP1s. He is that strong of a support, he is that strong of an enabler, and he just absolutely will help a more free-to-play minded account be able to do big boy damage. The issue at play, though, is then they come out with the 90++ nodes, and it's not that Oberon becomes essential by any means, it's just that he essentially will make your life easier in those nodes. Certainly, you can do 90++ without him, but it will be somewhat difficult, especially if you don't have the right units, or especially if you don't have the right NP levels. So that is the issue with 90++ content. If you don't have damage bonus in the event, or you don't have high NP levels, you're almost going to have to use Oberon to even have a chance. So it is what it is, but again, it's going to come down to whether or not you actually feel like you have to min turn those nodes, and in some cases, thankfully, you don't. So what makes Oberon so strong? Well, it's basically he is an AoE Buster Pretender. He increases the party's NP damage for 3 turns by 30%, which is just a strong effect naturally. Due to the fact that this is actually an NP damage buff, though, which when he originally came out was the rarest of sort of the 3 steroid types that you could get outside of super effective damage. So this was a really nice sort of synergistic addition to a lot of comps, as it just scaled multiplicatively and it just allowed for a lot of damage. He will also charge the party's NP gauge by 20%, which is very strong in and of itself. This gives him the ability to sort of raise the entire party up rather than just one devoted unit like we have with Scotty. So definitely a strong skill in a nutshell. His second skill here charges one ally's NP gauge by 50% and gives a 20 crit star bomb. However, it will also drain their charge by 20% after 1 turn. So just be careful with how you utilize this. It's not necessarily the best thing to use with arts and quick loopers, But again, as long as you use this skill on the third turn of a 3-turn loop, you don't care because the drain won't occur until after the node is functionally done. However, again, you can use this on a Buster unit at potentially any time as long as they don't have charge after their MP, because Buster units don't really care about refund. Again, the other consideration is that you may have to use it sooner than that, but it is what it is. Utilizing it on the third turn is almost always safe. Utilizing it earlier, you just have to consider how you're going to use it. This third skill here, though, is the actual world killer, if you will. This is a buster up of 1 turn by 50%. That is the least important aspect of this skill, hilariously enough. It's going to grant them an NP damage boost to his target. What this does effectively is it doubles every source of NP damage that a unit has, including from craft essences and mystic codes. So things like Black Grail that give 80% NP damage now give double instead. So it's very strong, and it's why it absolutely just ended up breaking the game in a lot of ways in terms of the amount of damage it allowed. It is only for 1 turn though, and again, you're going to want to use this on the final turn in a 3-turn loop, because the way to understand this is it will put the unit to eternal sleep after that. Your unit is completely bricked and unusable. There is no way around this effect. You cannot prevent it from landing, short of killing your unit before it lands. So again, yes, you can Arash someone, you can Qigong someone, but only to the extent that you've done it before the buff lands. Yes, that's right, I said buff. That's why you can't prevent it, no matter what way you can think of to try and prevent this. Trust me when I say that someone has already thought of it, we have already tested it, and it does not in fact work. So again, this is a pretty foolproof way of stopping people from actually being able to get around it. But that is the trade-off, is that Oberon is very much a damage amplifier, glass cannon type of unit. The second you pop off with that, you hit really hard, but you've blown your load and you can no longer use the unit after their turn ends. So be very careful with how you utilize this, including stuff like order change, also not going to work. So again, the fact that he's also 50% buster up here is really solid for buster units, but due to the actual strength of this effect, due to the doubling up of every source of NP damage, Oberon is good even in arts and quick comps as well, and that is what makes him a support that everyone will want to have. And we still haven't even talked about the rest of his kit, including his peculiarity with regards to being used alongside Merlin, which is the fact that you just don't want to use them in the party at the exact same time. His NP basically deals damage to all enemies, removes their offensive buffs, and then puts them to sleep for 1 turn. The demerit, though, is that it will also make the enemy invincible after the fact. You can get around this with Invuln Pierce or pre-carding, but I highly recommend going with the pre-carding route rather than the Invuln Pierce route, because if you Invuln Pierce it, you will wake them up out of sleep, which is kind of the entire benefit of using this, is that the unit will fall asleep almost as if they are stunned for the duration of that turn, making them unable to act when it is their turn. His overcharge effect, though, deals damage to lawful alignment enemies. It is super effective, and it does have its niche uses that can actually allow him to do decent damage, particularly if he puts his own skills on himself. But again, I can't stress enough how much Oberon is actually pretty much a really awesome unit, and how you really want to roll him if at all possible. We have already managed to talk about Percival and Red Hair in prior segments, so we will just round this out by talking about Coup Caster. So Coup Caster here ends up being a really strong AoE caster at this point in time. When he first started out in the game, he was actually just this sort of cockroachy, survivable AoE caster. He did not deal good damage. He had, decent survivability, but that was pretty much all he offered. He was a buster AoE with a triple arts deck. So again, another sort of year 1 type of design. His first skill has had its upgrade, though, basically increasing crit damage and debuff resistance for 3 turns by 50% each, but now also giving him a 30% charge on a 5-turn cooldown. Really solid, and a double Koyanskya comp means, yes, you can 3-turn with him. But not from 50%, instead from 0%. That's right, Coup Caster is a 3-star that is a Black Grail Looper, and that's what makes him so strong now. He grants himself evasion for 3 attacks with no expiration timing, so very strong in terms of survival, and also an increase to his own defense by 18%, all on a 5-turn cooldown. Ironically enough, this is a skill you don't have to lore on him regardless. His third skill has had its upgrade, but basically it starts out just as a simple disengage with a debuff cleanse and a heal, and then instead gets upgraded to now increase his own attack for 3 turns by 30%, and to also basically grant him the ability to have a delayed buff. Basically what it's going to do is it's going to put a guts on him, and then at the end of the turn it is going to sacrifice him. When the guts is procced, he will get 80% charge. So at the end of the turn, basically, he ends up dying, his guts procs, he gets 80% charge as he pops back up, and essentially you have it back for the next turn. This is all on a 5-turn cooldown, so you can do this at least twice in a 3-turn cadence, and that is why you want to pop this skill on turns 1 and 2, so that he just ends up handling basically 160% of his necessary 300% charge right there. With a double Koyanskya setup, you can get at least another 100% charge, and, well, Ku also has mana loading and a 30% charge skill that he can double up on, basically allowing for another 80% charge here. You do the math. Either way, that is well over 300, so it is what it is. His NP has had its NP interlude. It basically increases his own buster performance by 20% for 3 turns, activating first and dealing damage to all enemies. He will reduce their defense further for 3 turns by 10% after the damage goes out, and inflict burn for 10 turns to them. Really solid in that capacity as well. If you manage to need Invuln Pierce, Honey Lake is actually going to be really good on him because of that burn effect. And then similarly, being able to start out from Black Grail makes him quite the monster as far as a 3-star caster goes. He is a 3-star caster that actually rivals the 5 stars in terms of damage in a lot of ways. So again, getting your hands on more copies of Ku Caster is really solid, because everybody should have at least NP1 of him from the initial Fuyuki Singularity. So this is a decent time to roll for him since he is story locked, and you will see the banner pairings are actually quite nice. So right now you can see you got Muramasa paired with Red Hair, who is another story locked unit. You've got basically Melisande paired with Percival. Good luck to those of you that want an AoE Lancer. You just may not get the AoE Lancer you want. And again, Oberon paired with a story locked Ku Caster is one hell of a banner, one of the better banners you will see all year, depending on how you want to develop your account. And last but not least of the actual Road to 7 campaign here is the commemorative CE that you got at the end of LB6. You got 1 copy of it. Now you can potentially get MLB of it if you're a collector. Otherwise, this is a story locked CE, so good luck trying to actually get it without rolling in the story banner. Again, though, this is a very strong set of banners right here for the Road to 7 campaign, so I highly recommend you guys consider how you feel about them and whether or not you wish to save courts. That's just sort of the onset here for the entirety of December. Okay, so for the final day of banner review here, we are going to be covering the last bit of December here. Thankfully, at this point, because I have covered so many banners prior to this point, we're in the final stretch, and most of the units that will show up here, I have already managed to cover. So we just finished the Road to 7 Lost Belt 6 campaign. Now we've got the Lost Belt 7 pre-release support campaign part 2. There's really nothing in here. It's just kind of like, hey, you get some nice stuff as we're gearing up for LB7. Then we ended up going into the last rerun ever to date. And again, this is obviously dependent on JP. Now they've allowed for voting for a rerun, so go do that if you guys haven't already. But basically, this is the last rerun that we have had as of the recording of this video. This is our Carnimus rerun. And again, this one has obviously the return of Santa Carna, who is a single target quick saber. And then we have a couple of other units here. I believe we have already covered Vitra, Karna, Arjuna. And I know we got several of these. Okay, so after some deliberation, we have also already covered Parvati. We had to figure out which one of the 4 stars we hadn't covered because this is so late in the game at this point, but we have to cover Martha and Beowulf still. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and talk writer Martha. Martha at this point has become obviously more famous for her ruler counterpart, or sorry, version. Martha is definitely a fantastic unit, that being said. As a writer, she still has a lot of capability. The thing is, a lot of people will look down on her just due to the lack of charge in her kit and the fact that her damage overall as a writer is not that high. Don't worry about that. That's probably not going to be the biggest reason for why you'll use her. She is a Buster AoE writer with a triple arts deck. Again, you're starting to see a lot of these early triple arts decks, and the reason for this is it just really helped them card their way to an NP. This was sort of the meta deck of old, and it still to this day is a strong deck, and it's one of the reasons why they actually don't give as many units triple arts anymore, even arts units. Her first skill here increases her own debuff resistance for 3 turns up to 100% and is a self-heal. Rather selfish skill. I'd like to see it upgraded for some more party-wide effects, but it is what it is. Her second skill here is basically just a heal and party-wide cleanse, which again, party-wide cleanse, especially early on in FGO's history, definitely a nice thing to have. Still to this day, a really useful thing in her kit. It did get upgraded though to increase the amount of healing that it did, so again, just making it a little bit more usable. And the third skill here basically got unlocked after the second strengthening and now removes one target's buffs, and then reduces their defense by 30% for 3 turns. This is actually a really strong skill, particularly in a raiding environment. Martha can actually be one of those units that can cleanse the entire party of some sort of nasty debuff, strip the enemy of their really good defensive buffs, and then enable you to deal even more damage with the defense down. So that is one of her big uses, is just sort of as this option for either clearing a wave and setting someone else up, or the option of, again, just sort of controlling the flow of battle with regards to buffs and debuffs. Very similar to how we talked about Asclepius in that regard, and Martha kind of fills that niche as well. Not necessarily as good as Asclepius, but Martha is not a story-locked unit, and you can actually get her with the tutorial summon, so again, it is what it is, and she's still a pretty quality unit even to this day in terms of niche uses and challenge content. You can see her Noble Phantasm has had its upgrade. It now increases her own Buster performance first because, again, the damage was an issue by 20% there. Then it deals damage to all enemies, and then it further reduces their defense for 3 turns by 20%. You can also use this sort of, rather than taking out its own wave or something like that, but instead as the first NP in a sequence of NPs to make the later NPs deal more damage. So she can be sort of your setup man in order to help you out, kind of dealing a lot more damage to a annoying boss. So again, I do think Martha is a good unit to have in your Chaldea. Probably not someone you need to actually go after specifically though, so it is what it is. Next up here we have Beowulf. He is another permanent unit. Beowulf, I'm gonna say he hasn't necessarily come a long way, but he has had some work done. He's had a facelift, if you will, and he's definitely a solid unit in terms of his damage output. Again, you can see he's got over 10k attack. He is a single target Buster Berserker, and he's got the triple Buster Gorilla deck there to just really help that out. His first skill here increases his own attack by 30% for 1 turn and NP damage by 20% for 1 turn, all on a 5-turn cooldown, making it relatively low. The second skill here just started out as a normal instinct, but the devs decided to try and get rid of pretty much all the instincts in the game, and there's only a handful left at this point. So instead of just giving 14 stars, now he also increases his critical star absorption for 1 turn by 5,000. Basically increases his own critical damage for 1 turn by 50, and now gives 15 stars as well. So they just upped the stars by a tiny bit, but then gave him a really nice set of other effects here. This is very similar to Lalter's skill. It is the skill that it is modeled after, sort of the all-in-one type of crit skill, and it's really solid. It is also as well enough absorption on a Berserker to actually allow him to soak those stars, so really a nice upgrade for him in that regard. His third skill here just started out as a Guts of 1 time over 4 turns, reviving it up to 2000 HP on a 7-turn cooldown. It then got upgraded basically to increase his critical damage by 50% for 3 turns. So again, stacking with that second skill there for now 100% crit damage. And then also 2 power mods against dragon and giant enemies for 3 turns each at 50% each. So again, these can potentially be doubled up, but that's going to be a little bit of a weird one. Still, you may find yourself in a scenario where you need either of these, and he can absolutely be a good one. There are plenty of units that are actually pretty good at killing dragons. There are not too many that are actually good at killing giants. Again, the only one that really comes to mind off the top of my head is David. I believe, God, what's her name? Single target Buster Archer, 4-star. Name starts with an F. Fujino. Fujino also manages to, be effective, but it's more against super large in her case, so she's not got the actual giant niche. So in that regard, this could be something that can be really nice for Beowulf. And again, I do think that that he's pretty solid now that he has these 2 niches. You're not going to have a whole lot of uses for him, I'd say, overall, but given the fact that he has this, he now has ways that he can stand out. His Buster is a single target, his NP is a single target Buster of 12 hits, and you can see he ignores evasion for 1 turn and then deals damage to 1 enemy. But it has had its upgrade, and it increased the amount of damage that it does, and now it will also reduce the critical attack chance for 3 turns by a whopping 30%, which is a hefty amount. But again, he is a Berserker with no hard survival other than his guts. So you got to be a little bit careful with Beowulf, especially if it's going to be a challenge environment where he might have to go a duration rather than just try to one-tap an enemy with his NP and subsequent Buster cards. If you can get the latter effect there, basically just able to one-tap an enemy, that's absolutely ideal for him. But if you can't, be careful. Again, he doesn't have any charge in his kit either, so he's not going to have any sort of way to easily get to his NP without assistance, and that's perfectly fine. But at the end of the day, I do think Beowulf still hits very hard. That's going to be it for this banner then, for the units that we've covered. You can see the rate ups basically kind of just keep going and going and going. Several weeks worth of rate ups for this banner, basically with all of the units getting at least over 7 days. It looks like it's about 10 to 11 days each, so definitely pretty nice in that regard. And you can see you have some interesting pairings of Vitra with Martha. Karna with Parvati is probably the weakest pairing, not because they are bad units, but more because this is a double AoE Lancer. If you do need an AoE Lancer, this would actually be a stellar banner for you, as you would pretty much be guaranteed to at least get something. But definitely not going to be good for the spooks if you're, say, trying to get Karna, or you just want a lot of copies of Parvati. You may just find that Desire Sensor sees you getting the other unit instead. And then the last one here is going to be Arjuna with Beowulf. To me, not necessarily the best pairing there because I don't have the highest opinion of Arjuna, but not bad in the grand scheme of things. Just looking at the CEs here, Twinkle Star, honestly, nothing really to write home about. Redbox and Freeze Frame are nothing really too hot either. So this one, to me, probably not the best of banners to roll for in the grand scheme of things, particularly given all the banners you've had prior in the year, and particularly considering you will be coming into the LB7 banners after the end of the year, which is something to keep in mind. Again, this is going to be a Lotto, though, so it is what it is. But I believe it is capped at 20 boxes in this case, because the Carnimus Lotto had a particular gimmick that required it to go more than 10 boxes. Still, it is a sort of short-lived rerun in that regard. And then we end up having the Melty Blood type Lumina campaign. This is actually where Dantes gets his upgrade. You can see you get some nice commemorative CEs as well. And that is where he got his 30% charge. You guys don't have to worry about this, though, because NA already has this buff, so it just is what it is. And now you can see we also get a summoning campaign, not for Dantes, because he's actually already had several this year, but instead for Artoria and Ushi. We've already actually talked about both of these units, so I don't have to give you guys the lowdown on it, but it is definitely an interesting banner if you're looking for more of a solo environment for Saber. Again, you did have the Valentine's option, but maybe that wasn't a good time to roll there. And so outside of that, yeah, this may be a decent time for people if they want coins for Saber or they just want copies. No CEs on rate up, thank God. So you do at least have sort of the unofficial K-Scope and Black Grail rate ups, even though those don't actually exist. It's just sort of the meme that whenever there is no rate up CE, that it is a good time to roll if you want permanent CEs. But again, that is a fairly simple banner. Then we had the Fate Extra Last Encore. I think it's a Blu-ray disc standard edition and OST release campaign. There is no guarantee that we get really either this one or the Melty Blood banner. Hopefully we do, and they just don't skimp on it, or they bring it early at some point. You know, the NA devs, they like to mess with our clairvoyance some, so don't be surprised they actually do push something forward, but it is what it is. You can see there are some other nice login reward CEs here. We do also have basically Memoria of Lunar Mare coming back into the Mystic Code shop here and basically being, free, if I remember correctly. Yes, there it is. And again, you have some other campaigns for 2x chance super great success for some of these units. The real focus here, obviously, in banner review is going to be the summoning campaign between Nero Bride and just OG Nero. We have actually covered both of these units prior in the year. I believe Nero Bride was the pre-campaign for Valentine's, and I think OG Nero was at Tesla Fest, if memory serves. You want to go look up what I had to say about each of them. But that being said, this banner has a special consideration simply due to the fact that both of these units are on rate up at the same time. So if you really like Umu, this is absolutely an ideal pairing for you if you haven't managed to complete one of the units. Even if you maybe have completed, say, like OG Umu, but you needed more copies of Bride, you would still also potentially be getting more coins for your story-locked OG Umu. So it's definitely not a bad banner to roll, all things considered. Again, no rate up CEs here, so you're kind of free and in the clear in that regard. Definitely one that I would consider if you are an Umu fan. But again, remember, there's no guarantee that we get this at any point in time. Then you had the Lost Belt 7 pre-release support campaign, part 3. Again, just more quartz, more blue prisms. Do be careful. I don't want to spoil anything in LB7 for you, but there are definitely parts of LB7 that you will hope to use your blue prisms on that you cannot. So keep that in mind. It's not the end of the world if you actually do use some of your blue prisms early. There may be fights that do sort of require it for you if you have a less developed account, but it is what it is, and it's just nice to actually have them being given out. 2700 days anniversary is just going to end up being sort of more quartz for you guys. You guys pretty much know at this point. We've seen several of these as we have gone throughout the year. We have the Lost Belt 7 pre-release support campaign, part 4. This one actually does have a summoning campaign, including some login rewards. Basically, the return of Koyanskya of Light. So, thankfully, we did get the banner here early in the year, but for those of you guys that didn't acquire her there, this will be your next banner. So if you've managed to miss out somehow on the first 2 Koyanskya of Light banners, finally here you will get another one, basically, 11 months later. So really nice to have this because it's just her on rate up, nothing else to interfere. You don't have to worry about any other considerations really. You do also have Summer Anniversary. We've already talked about this CE before. It is a 60% starting charge CE at MLB, so it's actually quite a nice CE depending on who you want to put it on. Otherwise, nothing too much to talk about with regards to the rest of the rate up CEs. We've already talked about Koyanskya of Light at this point, or actually no, I don't believe we did, simply due to the fact that she came out basically before I started recording the banner review. So just in the off chance that I didn't, we'll go ahead and talk about her real quick. She is at this point kind of your premier sort of buster support. You definitely have Oberon that represents a whole heck of a lot of charge and damage, but Koyanskya of Light enables the party to be able to do things that it absolutely wouldn't be able to do just with Oberon, or really anyone else for that matter. She is a buster AoE assassin, and her damage is actually quite good, especially in niche. She's got double buster cards to help that out to that end, and basically double quick cards here with decent hit counts. Her first skill here charges one ally's gauge by 50%. You're definitely going to want to lure it just for that reason alone. And then also reduces their skill cooldowns by 2. So this is where the meta of having double Koyanskya's comes from, is because you're not only going to get some nice buffs, but you're also going to get a lot of charge and basically -4 to cooldown reduction here. That means that any unit that has a 6-turn skill or less can get their skill back within a 3-turn, because a 3-turn will also have 2 more turns of degradation. So when you pair that with the 4 turns that you would get from double Koyanskya, it equals out to 0. So that's the easy way to think about it, is any unit whose skills are 6 turns or less can be made to get back to their skill within a 3-turn sequence, as long as you started by popping it on turn 1. Any unit with a 5-turn skill can pop them subsequently on back-to-back turns, so maybe turn 1 and turn 2, or maybe turn 2 and turn 3, just depending on how you handle it. It's a really, really amazing system. I'm actually pretty impressed that the devs managed to think of this, because I think while this was something that was on a lot of people's radar, it was not something that we actually thought they would, put a full-blown system in the game for. So definitely pretty smart of them. It's going to deal 1,000 damage without killing the party, unfortunately, but again, if you're using her, you're probably in some sort of like 3-turn setup, so you're probably going to just try to outright kill the node and not worry about challenge scenarios. You can take her into a challenge scenario, but you're probably going to end up needing some sort of sustain besides just her. Again, you can see, though, that this skill is on an 8-turn cooldown, which causes her some grief, basically, if you're trying to manage to 3-turn with her as the focus. It is certainly possible to do so, but odds are you are not going to get back to Innovator Bunny, and it's usually, in most cases, not worth actually trying to. Her second skill here is a targetable effect that increases one ally's damage against human enemies for 3 turns and increases their damage against enemies with the man attribute for 3 turns. So, that we are aware, this is basically man niche. There is, yes, the human aspect to it, but human is not the humanoid niche. They are 2 different niches. Human affects far less important enemies. There are some interesting uses for it, though, but it's still not nearly as wide as a lot of people think it is as far as niches go. Again, a 50% power mod on each of these for 3 turns is pretty nice. And then also a beneficial effect of whenever you attack with a buster card, it will increase your NP gauge, and then you just have a star bomb attached to this as well. So it's up to 10% charge whenever the target attacks with their buster cards, and then whenever Koyanskya ends up using this skill, you just get 20 stars. This in combination with another Koyanskya having this skill, also giving 20 stars, in combination with probably an Oberon with his middle skill, also giving 20 stars. You have got over 60 stars that you can just manufacture like that in the middle of any Buster comp, and it absolutely just makes Buster a pretty automated system in terms of outright damage output. Her third skill here increases one ally's Buster performance for 3 turns by 50%, as to be expected of a meta support at this point in time. You just get a really nice 3-turn steroid. It's also going to increase their critical damage of the Buster cards by 50%, and then the critical star absorption by 5,000%, which would be enough to make even Avengers and Berserkers soak these stars. So really, really good in that fact, as it's just going to result in a lot of hefty Buster crits. Again, some really nice passives here, including an increase to her own NP damage by 20%. Again, a passive like that can be boosted by Oberon, so there is a lot of power there in that. Her NP is an 8-hit AoE Buster NP, as we mentioned before. It increases her own attack by 20% before damage goes out, and then deals damage to all enemies while also draining them. So yes, she is an AoE drain, and it's guaranteed. There's no chance on it or anything like that. So this is probably one of the less remembered aspects of Koyanskya's NP, but it is actually very good for her in that regard. From here, she will also charge the party's MP gauge. This is another effect a lot of people have a tendency to forget, but basically you get 10% charge if you use her NP. So this could be used in a sequence of NPs to give somebody else some more charge at the end, or it could maybe just be used to get somebody set up for a subsequent wave to have enough charge to clear. So this can absolutely help Koyanskya, as it can just be something where maybe she takes out one of the waves and enables somebody else. So there is some interesting applications to the fact that she can provide the party with some additional charge. Again, I do think Koyanskya is absolutely a meta unit, still to this day on JP. You absolutely want to have her if you can get your hands on her. She will really make farming with Buster comps a lot more powerful and a lot more viable. Having the ability to get back to your skill cooldowns a second time means that those really nice 40% attack ups or like 30% Buster ups that units have, they can double up on them if they're multi-turn, and it just makes them even stronger. She is a force multiplier in that regard, and she works out really, really well. That is her banner in a nutshell there, and so with that, we move on to the FGO Winter Party campaign in Hokkaido. This was a live event in JP. They did, however, have a summoning campaign for it. I'm not gonna guarantee that you'll actually get this. They'll probably end up using it basically for the live stream where they talked about LB7. So you can expect that to be a thing, and they'll probably just use this as some sort of segue to give us the summoning campaign. I don't think they'll skip it just to allow us to have it, but again, at the end of the day, it may not be called the exact same thing as it was on JP, because it's not like we have Hokkaido here in the United States. Again, in this case, this banner is certainly an interesting one. I think a lot of people are going to be looking forward towards Summer Melisson at this point as another AoE ruler whose arts. So I think a lot of people will probably wind up skipping Moriarty, but it does not mean Moriarty is a bad unit. He is a Black Grail Looper. So if you like him, feel free to go after him. He is still a pretty good unit in terms of his performance. Mysterious Alter Ego Lambda, aka Melt Lancer, is also quite good. The damage at this point definitely leaves a lot to be desired, but she is definitely a fluid looper as far as arts units go. We've already talked about both these units though prior in this, so again, just go find the points where I talk about them and you will see what I had to say. Then we end up with the LB7 chapter release. So there's nothing too much here because of the way that LB7 released. There were no banners on release of LB7. The very first banner that you actually end up getting for it is New Year's. And it's dubious to say that it's actually tied in at best. It is tied in, but not in the way you necessarily think. So it is an interesting thing that they did with this one, where for the first time ever, they just launched a chapter with no summonable servants for the first week. In fact, they even denoted this, that basically in the live stream that there would not be a banner on release of LB7, which just blew everyone's mind. In fact, for a year that has had just a crazy amount of banners, again, every single limited SSR got covered this year, except Benny Inma. And Benny Inma bookended the year. She actually had a banner right before the year began and has a banner right after it ends. So it's kind of wild that for a year in which we had a record-breaking number of banners, that they released an entire major story chapter without any actual banner attached to it. Again, they just wanted to delay it to a later point. They definitely had some issues getting LB7 out, and that is why it was the way it was. So we move on to the broadcast campaign here, and it basically just was a chance for them to give out more apples. You can see this was also the strengthening quest for Gil. Basically that added NP damage of allies with Sky attribute, which includes himself, and a crit star effect there. And then the upgrade to Enkidu that gave Enkidu 50% charge, because somehow the devs thought that Enkidu actually needed that. Again, you can see there are comeback login bonuses, but that is basically it. Nothing more to this year. This is just the advanced quest at the end, and that's a wrap. So that is going to be it for banner review. I hope it was not as long for you guys as it was for me on this end. I do hope you enjoyed all the analysis and insight. I do love making these, but definitely I think for the next year, we will have to tone down just how many units I go over. Maybe we won't go over some of the like permanent 3 stars and maybe even like permanent units from prior years. We'll see, because the banners are getting huge and it definitely bloats this video. So I will try to keep it more concise in the future. Thank you all for watching. Let me know what units you're going to roll for this year in FGO. And don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons. I will see you guys for the next one. Have a good one.